Welcome everyone to this Board of Selectmen's meeting, October 17, 2017. We always start with a reminder that we are being recorded, and we also take a moment to express appreciation for our troops that are serving around the world, and we also want to, at the same time, remember town employees Jack O'Toole and Dorcas Owen, who died this past week. Thank you. Let's see, we have an announcement here. To start with, the Medfield Transfer Station and Recycling Committee is seeking new members. The committee meets on the second Monday of the month at 10 a.m. Interested residents, please contact Town Hall or Committee Chairwoman Megan Sullivan. And they're doing some interesting things in terms of, I think she said they were looking at whether to do curbside pickup, actually. That's one of the things they were looking at. And we are going to start today with Roberta Lynch, Council on Aging Director, discuss COA outreach worker position. You want us to, Mike, Chris?
Well, this came about, I believe, because when we were discussing the Veteran Services Officer, the suggestion was made that we combine the Council on Aging social worker with the Veteran Service Officer position, make it full-time position. There would be a consolidation of the two. And right now, you have a full-time, right now we have a full-time position, social worker position for Council on Aging, and this would replace that. You would still have another half-time position left over. And the selectmen seem to be interested in that. I know Ron Griffin is here, and he thought that might be a good idea. So I don't know what your feelings are on, I guess I do know what your feelings are. We saw the letter, so.
Well, you know what my feelings are. I don't believe that slicing the outreach position in half is going to streamline and have a positive impact on the seniors in Medfield at all. You know, our mission at the Council on Aging is to provide services for seniors so that they can age in place and they have quality of life. And to do that, in my opinion, having been director for 16 years of this department, one full-time outreach worker is what I want for my department. I understand the situation that the town faces. However, I have to look at what's best for my department and for the services we provide. I think that having two part-time outreach worker limits relationship building with the seniors. It also provides either a duplication of services, which is a waste of money and time, or a lack of services, which is a problem for the seniors in town. It's a major administrative challenge, I think, for me, as I will be training two people for one job, when I would much prefer to have consistency with one full-time person. There's no guarantee that my hours in the building would be mirrored, and that's one of the things that I'm most in favor of, is to have mirrored hours with me so that I have the opportunity to attend meetings and conferences. And most importantly, the recruitment of the proposed position, in my opinion, will be difficult. I spoke with Cindy Snell. She's the career counseling person at BC, and I know there's been, Gus, we talked about it last week, the big emphasis on BC and the veterans program there. Cindy told me that they actually don't recruit veterans. In fact, they don't even know how many veterans they have. Usually, she said, maybe one or two if they disclose themselves. Don't quote me on that, she said. And they have a 3-course certificate program for Veterans Affairs. That's an elective for any social work student in the School of Social Work. So it's not actually, it doesn't, and I have it, I printed it off if you want to see. It's 3 courses, they get a certificate, it's an elective, and social work students can apply for 3 of those certificate programs. But you don't have to be a veteran for those certificate programs. And lastly, and then I'm going to let my board speak, I communicated with the COA director in Franklin, Karen Alves, who at one point had a VSO and outreach worker combined. And this is what she said to me. It seemed to work out at the time, but when we hired an outreach worker to do strictly outreach, we quickly found that there was more work than she could handle. So I think I've done, I've been open, I've done a little research, and I really believe that one outreach worker for the Council on Aging is in our best interest. Now, if you asked me what my needs are at the Council on Aging, nobody has done that. I asked last fiscal year, for a part-time front desk person. We need that desperately to work alongside our receptionists, our tax work-off receptionists. The other thing, if I had an option, I need is, I guess you would call them like the schools have, a custodian. I did some numbers together. I paid $14,000 last fiscal year for landscaping to mow the lawn and snow shoveling and cleaning the building, Tidy Solutions. So, I have a need, and I have a need there for somebody to be in the building because we have a lot of mishaps in the bathrooms. We have trash that needs to go out to the dumpsters, which I bring out now because some staff have bad backs. I have a driver who's been out since August 30th who had shoulder surgery, so he will no longer be able to help as physically as he has had in the past. He's not going to be able to shovel snow or clean off the buses, and nor am I. I'm going to be 60. So that is a need I have in the building. So if we want to combine something, I would rather you look at something that is really going to help the Council on Aging and the people who participate there and come in, especially in the winters. I can't have sidewalks that are icy, absolutely not. I can't be shoveling and cleaning off the buses that are 12, 13 feet high to get the snow off, because it's illegal to have snow on your roof when you're driving around. So those are my needs. It's not to slice the outreach worker in half. It's to have a full-time outreach worker to serve the people, the seniors in the community of Medfield. And we can talk about other options that would also help the seniors in town. Would you like to say anything, Bob?
I'm sorry, I'm Bob Heald, I'm the chairman of the Council on Aging. We support Roberta's position, and furthermore, we don't feel that if we split this outreach person in half, that's going to protect the confidentiality of the people who need this service. They're going to have to explain to both people, these are my needs, these are my problems. If one person that they're normally dealing with isn't there that day, then they have to deal with the other person. So the continuity won't be there. And there's all kinds of problems. I think I've read things on job sharing, and that's what you basically would have here, is you'd have two people sharing a full-time job. That leads for problems in who's going to be in charge, so to speak. I mean, it's one position, but you got two people filling it. So you have problems with the people interacting with each other. Who is this VSO person and outreach person? Who is they going to report to? Who's going to have charge of that person? We have to have someone that, who's going to decide when there's a problem that the veterans needs and the outreach needs. How does the person decide which way to go? And how does he set priorities, or he or she set priorities? So we feel that there's just too many problems if we split this in half. We've had a full-time person. We have been, I think it's almost 8 weeks now, without a replacement. We need to get going. We need to have something decided and something done because we need to serve the people that we've been called on to serve.
I kind of think, excuse me, I'm Gwen Centauri, and I'm a member of the Council on Aging. And I think actually what I was going to say has already been said, but what I really feel that the continuity of care of the elderly will be compromised if you do this. I think that elderly people, I'm thinking of my mother now, elderly people get a little bit more confused than we do. I'm almost there, but more than I do. Maybe their hearing is a little bad. I think that they need to have a relationship with one person, and I don't think if they have a problem, they want to be spreading it around. One person will make them feel that that they're concerned with that the outreach worker is concerned with them, and that they will give them their all. Not that they have to, maybe he's not there that day, maybe he's there in the morning, she wants to come in the afternoon. I just think it's not going to be something that will work smoothly. And I think that we need to be thinking that we need to take care of the elderly in this town. And I think this was the wrong department to try to split. That's what I think.
My name is Perry Constas. I'm a board member on the Council of Aging. And I'm working under the premise that you're talking about two functions, two people, or one person that would do both.
I think what we
Be
talked about
proposing.
is there would be a full-time employee.
One full-time employee.
No, if I could finish the sentence. A full-time employee who would be the veteran service officer and also assigned to the Council on Aging. And then there'd be a second part-time employee also assigned to the Council on Aging. I think that was the working assumption and that we were operating under, that you would combine whatever amount of time was needed for the veteran service work, which we understand from Ron to be how many hours per week?
It varies, but some weeks can be very, some weeks I worked over 40 hours, and some weeks 6 hours was fine. So it varies.
A mix. And then the other person would be half-time and assigned to the Council on Aging. That was, I think, what the working suggestion was
Yep.
in our meeting.
So in essence, you currently have, or you have had a full-time outreach worker, that's one full-time equivalent, and we've had a half-time VSO. And the job for the VSO is not any greater than half-time, except that the law requires us to have a full-time VSO who doesn't have to work full-time as a VSO. So what we're really trying to do is just figure out how to take 1.5 full-time equivalents across 2 jobs right now and reconfigure it to keep it at 1.5 time full-time equivalents in a way that might actually give an added benefit, but at the very least would be equivalent.
So it's not as if you're looking for someone that would be a hybrid, that would be doing VSO and doing
Well-
case management?
So Mike, you might comment on this, because Roberta and I met, and I think you mentioned Westwood. Initially, we were doing it that mechanically, yes. But what I think we've understood is that some towns allow a single person to be hired full-time to technically be the VSO, supported by a half-time worker, so.
Well, we met with the town administrator of Dover because the way the law reads, you have to have a contiguous district, and we're not contiguous with Westwood.
We're not talking about that. Wasn't there a town that actually had a full-time town worker doing a full-time town job?
Yes,
Technically
I
designated as
believe-
that's the issue
I
we're
believe
talking about.
Westwood and Franklin both do that.
Right. So in that configuration, to Roberta's issue of not wanting to split the outreach worker job, we could actually do that with the person who is a veteran and supplement them with a half-time worker.
I guess the question is, the social worker would have to also be a veteran.
Right.
Yep.
Right. We have, I mean, the problem is we're required by the state to hire a person somewhere in the town of Medfield who is entitled to veteran service officer who's a full-time employee. We do not have full-time work for that full-time employee. So we are trying to find within the Department of Medfield a position where we can have a full-time employee who is designated as the veteran service officer, who is compliant with, so it's compliant with the law, and then would spend, the balance of his or her time doing something else for the town. And I think, as we discussed it with Ron, as we discussed it with the board, we thought there might be synergies between someone who's a veteran service officer helping veterans with applications for benefits and things like that, and someone who's a social worker. That might be a set of skills that one person might have, as opposed to a person who's a veteran service officer and an assistant town accountant, or a veteran service officer and the town planner, or a veteran service officer and a fire lieutenant. I think in Westwood, I believe the veteran service officer is a firefighter, and there's a clerical worker who's not a veteran who processes most of the paperwork. But the technically designated veteran service officer is a firefighter. So what we're trying to do is avoid hiring a full-time employee for a part-time job. And so we have been open, and shockingly, not every department has come forward to say, we're happy to help you with this problem. Everyone says we want our own people. We're trying to find a way to do that so we aren't essentially paying the person a full-time salary for what is not a full-time job. And so we've been looking for a solution to the conundrum the state put us in, and we thought that a social worker who was a veteran might have those combination of skills. That was where we came to. This was not intended to take anything away from the Council on Aging. This was trying to figure out the skill set of a person who would be a veteran, to be the veteran service officer, where else could they fit? Because it's hard to find. It's hard to
And the
find someone in this
benefit,
position.
and the benefit for the Council on Aging that I saw was that you had a one full-time equivalent position, and all of a sudden you'd have a 1.5 full-time equivalent in the building. I've had a conversation with Roberta about it. She tells me that doesn't work. There isn't physical space for it. And she doesn't want it, apparently, so.
But do you all understand, do you have empathy and feeling and understanding of the volume of work that the case manager, which is a whole different ballgame than veteran services, all due respect, I'm a veteran. And, you know, the VA is one thing, but the aging population in Medfield is growing. And I go to the center frequently, not every day, maybe 4 days a week. And I can't get over the number of people in my generation who are struggling. So we're dealing with crises, not just benefits and advice, but they're looking for someone who has the experience to guide them through this maze in a time of intense suffering and anguish and total confusion. And I think the case manager has that capacity and knowledge to do that. And we need someone who has in a hurry. We can't wait. It's been like, what, 8 weeks now? We've got people there who are confused, who need assistance, need guidance. You need someone who can guide them and navigate the system to lead them in the direction where they get the support they need, both medical, social, psychological, and you need someone who has that continuity, someone they can look to, and you know, I may want to see them. You may have a care provider whose spouse is either in advanced stage of Alzheimer's or dementia. It's that kind of thing, and I confirm what you said, Gwen. You know, it's a time of intense development of people and I'm in that generation myself.
So I think we hear that issue. So the issue of a full-time outreach worker, Roberta was pretty eloquent, but there is an option for having that and still being able to meet the veterans' need. And now I'm a little confused because in the last, this is now the third meeting we've gone in thinking there was a special veteran social worker program at BC. So there's something confusing.
I have that paperwork if you want documentation.
Well, I would have a couple questions. First off, if there's 3 VA certificate programs,
There's one,
well, there's 3 certificates though, right?
3 courses,
Right.
and a certificate.
Right.
That gives, it's an elective.
So the question would be, does BC have social workers who are veterans? I find it very hard to believe that a college doesn't know whether they have veterans as students or that they can't figure that out.
She said they do not track that demographic, and the only way they know is if the veteran comes forward and says, I'm a veteran.
May
And
I?
I believe, Christine, that you talked to BC yesterday, and there was no interest, or there was no,
She posted the job notification for the outreach worker and the veteran services officer. She had talked to students, and she didn't have any interest that she knew of, but she didn't know if anybody had applied on their own, but I have not received any resumes.
So you're satisfied that's not a source of a potential candidate from BC? Okay, then that's off the table.
I think, I don't know if that gentleman had a,
Why don't you go ahead, Mike, and then we'll get to him.
okay.
Can I?
Yeah, we're just gonna hear from Mike first.
While the mic's being passed, let me just make one comment. First off, I told you when we met, this is not, from my standpoint, we just decided we're gonna jam this down your throat whether you like it or not. So that's not the issue here. I do think, based on, Ron, things that you've told us over the last year, that the fact that the population you serve is an overlapped population, and the comments Ron has made about how he is extended beyond just pure role of Veterans Affairs through the SHINE training, part of the thinking was that there was in fact synergy with a veteran service officer located at the Council on Aging, supporting the same population, or a subset of the same population that your outreach workers. So there was a rationale that was not intended to put a burden on the center, but rather a rationale that said, of all the places we could put a veteran service officer where there might actually be synergy, based on what you've been telling us about the role that you've been able to play, that made some sense. Maybe that's impossible and we're off looking for something else, but that was why this came here in the first place, and the fact that you're the first ones that are looking. I think, as far as I'm concerned, every department that's looking to hire anybody is going to go through this drill until we figure this out. Yeah.
But can you get the microphone back then, please, Roberta, please?
Sorry about that. I should have kept my mouth shut.
So I'm just going to say that the town was very fortunate to have Ron Griffin, because he started out way back when I was at the FAF Center as our Shine counselor. So he started volunteering, not as the veteran service officer at that time, because I believe Marshall Chick was in the position. So you had the benefit of a gentleman who knew Medicare, knew Mass Health inside and out. And then when the time came, he stepped into the veterans role. So I would have to say that, you know, that might be very difficult to find again, to find a veteran who's probably quite knowledgeable, if they're going to be a VSO, in veterans benefits, but they're not necessarily going to have that SHINE background and that Medicare and insurance knowledge that Ron had. So we had the advantage of Ron for many years, which I'm very thankful for, and all your presentations, Ron, they were phenomenal, and we certainly missed that. And I don't think that's going to be found again. So to presume that a veteran is coming in is going to be able to do SHINE and overlap, like you say, I probably think that's not the case.
I would push the other way and say, I get your point, but if you had a veteran who had all of those, was a social worker, where the challenge...
Social workers know SHINE. Not all social workers.
No, I understand that. What I'm saying is, you're talking about somebody who stepped into the veterans role because they had some background in things like Medicare. I assume outreach has to have some knowledge of I'm assuming that's part of what we're talking about for outreach, is somebody who understands the government programs that they can help people get plugged into?
Could I offer some
Sure.
comments that I
Sure.
think would be
Yeah,
relevant?
yeah.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
Lyman Morrow. My wife and I are residents of Medfield in our late 70s. I'm a veteran. I served as a naval officer from the early 60s to the mid-60s, and this man has been tremendously helpful to me, and I don't diminish at all what he does. But to me, one thing that's missing in understanding, and my wife and I are classic examples of it, we live in a bedroom suite with our daughter and son-in-law and two youngest grandchildren here in town. And our goal, our hope, our dream is to age in place. We're in our late 70s. Good Lord willing enough for us to live much older. A time will come when we cannot do what we need to have done. And some people will go into an institution, an assisted living or a continuous care, and the services will be there. Those of us who choose to want to age in place, this outreach person is critical, because there's dozens, hundreds of people out there offering skilled nursing, physical therapy, speech therapy, etc. A lot of them are great. Some of them, the main thing about their business model is to take advantage of the elderly and charge them twice what it's worth. This person will know that a skilled nurse gets $80 an hour, not 150. And she or he will know that that's for the time they're in their house, not when they're coming from Worcester to the house. And it doesn't include travel expenses. Or it does. That person will know that the standard is it includes all these things. And to do this effectively, this has to be a hard-driving professional who has in touch with, you know, Westwood, Needham, Millis counterparts, and those counterparts view him or her as a hard-driving professional like them, and they'll say things that they wouldn't say to me, an individual, because it would be libelous, you know, but they might say, you know, Joe Schmo, he's starting to hire guys with drug problems or gals with drug problems. You know, this is really a very professional, critical,
Could I?
full-time position for us, and that's just the point I wanted to offer for what it's worth.
Thank you very much,
I have a
sir.
question for you, though.
Yes.
So, first off, I don't think this is a discussion around whether the outreach worker position is justified or not. So,
Okay.
to that point, I get it. Would you consider it more important for the town to move ahead quickly, filling that outreach worker's slot, knowing that that will result in us delaying our efforts to hire a VSO? So you've benefited from both programs.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that, in your view, the outreach worker spot is far more important and urgent to be filled right away, even if we have to defer filling that VSO slot longer to find another appropriate spot?
Now, I'm not a good person to ask, because
Yes,
I'm in
you
my
are.
late 70s and I feel healthy as a beer, okay?
Well, yeah,
So
that's fine.
hopefully,
But you-
hopefully, but I wish there was someone here, and there isn't, who was 87 rather than 77. Back there, right there.
Are you a veteran?
The need,
So but could you answer my question?
me personally.
For you.
Me personally.
I know I'm putting you on the
I tell
spot.
you, This
I know I'm
guy
putting you on the spot.
here, I explored, I need hearing aids, which is, and after a lot of talking, this guy made me realize that the hearing aid program of the Veterans Administration is really for people who can't afford them, okay? And I talked with him about cooking the books, you know, and he said, a lot of people do that. Here's the forms, but you know, and to me, that ended the subject. So I don't need any more of his services, okay? So,
I'll take that as a yes.
you know, I see your point, but and you know, the budgeting of the town and so forth. The only thing I wanted to make is, we were talking about this social worker person, you know, who could be this or that. This really is a specialty. That's the only thing I wanted to offer.
I think that what we've heard is that the Council on Aging and Roberta are not welcoming the overture and the synergies that we thought, and so that apparently it's not gonna work. I would suggest that you go and talk to the youth outreach and see if it would somehow work with them in some way, other than, because it's clearly not gonna work here.
And I think the other thing we have some candidates that have applied for the position, and I think we probably need to interview them and see if there's any of those candidates
Yeah,
that
all
would
right.
be acceptable.
And I would not
Since
rule
we-
out the possibility that the town just goes back and says, if any of those candidates are half-time, I would not rule out the option of us going back to the state and saying, listen, it's a job, we're trying, you all are hearing, we got pushed a month or two ago to fill this slot. And we're trying to fill this slot in the way that's legally compliant, because some people have said, well, you need to get on the stick. We're getting on the stick. But
I think there have been some
you
of
can
those.
see what happens.
I think there have been some of those discussions already, Gus, going on, so.
So my point is, understand what we're dealing with here and trying to fill these two needs without destroying or hurting what's there. I think on our part sincerely, and it's largely because of how you've described what you've done, Ron, we saw perhaps more potential synergies because of the commonality in the population and the relationship of the programs here than anywhere else, and that's why it made sense.
Did you answer your own question with that remark you just made? The question you asked before?
Which question?
Question about, is it more critical to fill the outreach position now and defer the veterans position for later? If you asked me, I would say yes.
Well, yeah, and that, I don't think I was ever making the case that a half-time VSO position was more important than a full-time outreach anyway, without knowing all the details, but I hear you. The issue was, is there no way for us to do both of those things in a way that's the mutual benefit of both? And the question, this is not, in my opinion, the Board of Selectmen's problem. It's the town's problem, and we're trying to figure out how to solve it. So if we have departments that each have their own narrow interests and are not willing to explore the possibilities, we got a problem. If there's, and Roberta, we've talked, I'm not hammering you. I'm saying that first time out the gate, when the answer is, sorry, our system, the way we work is great, we don't want to look at that. Well, what we're saying as a town is we're not concerned about hiring veterans. I'd like to see us hire a young veteran that has a career in mind, who's willing to step into the VSO slot, as opposed to what's traditionally been, I think, with the VSO, is looking for a retired veteran who's only looking for a half-time job. So my personal interest as someone supporting veterans is I'd like to see somebody coming back from the Middle East that's pursuing a career that's young, that's starting a young family, and sits there and looks at Medfield and says, no way I could move there as good as their schools are, and we sit there and find a way to let them find a job. That's actually, in the best of all worlds, what I'd want.
Roberta, final comment?
I was just going to say, just offer it up again, those two other options of needs for the Council on Aging that could combine with your VSO. I'm just throwing that out there again. The custodian for the building, who takes care of the outside, snow shoveling, takes that $14,000, can be used in that direction, or the administrative help at the front desk. As you recall, when the letter I wrote when this began, we have over 900 people utilizing the building. We have over 100 people Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and we have 75 to 80 on Mondays, and almost 75 on Fridays. It's a very busy, active place. So any help that the center can get in either of those directions would be well received.
So the other thing that I would suggest, Mike, either you or Chris, to maybe talk with Roberta at some point about whether the Council on Aging grounds should be added to the contract that whoever it is, Shady Tree, or whoever it is it Park and Rec now, or whoever it is that's doing the grounds.
I think Jerry probably is, that's one of the things he's
To
taking a
include
look at or move,
the
yeah.
Council on
yeah.
Aging within the contract so that
Yeah.
they get their grounds covered as part of the town.
Yeah, it shouldn't be done separately. It should
Yeah.
be done by town.
I think actually, when it comes to, first up, I'm totally in agreement that you shouldn't be taking snow off buses, or for that matter, even dumping the rubbish, and, I mean, unless it's just
Absolutely.
one wastebasket, so there's.
She's been
what
mowing
I-
the lawn, too.
Well.
I have mowed the
yeah,
lawn
so what-
also.
What I'm hearing here, quite aside from,
And I have used a snow blower for many years. Many years.
anybody need, maybe Roberta could hire her out as a.
Are you a veteran?
No. I quit at 60, I quit.
What I was going to say, though, is some of the things you were just talking about tonight are, in my mind, a separate issue around the needs of the center, quite independent of filling an outreach slot or filling a VSO slot. And I guess it's probably, at some point, should fall on the facilities manager's job to bring total coherence to who's responsible for the grounds across the town between the highway department and the Parks and Rec, or whatever it is we've got. Because right now, that, as far as I can tell, the current configuration is a remnant of years of budget. I don't want to take it on my budget, so it's got no coherence to it, other than if you put 30 years of budget fighting together, that's what it looks like, so.
Well, we better let him get on and find out what he's been up to these
Good.
last
Just-
6 months.
We've got one more comment in the back here. Can you just send back the microphone?
I don't know if I can handle 2 of these or not. But this is the first time talking in public with this device, and I just got out of rehab for 2 years, and I'm a new citizen in this town. When I came here, it took me a couple of months before I went to the senior center. I call it a senior center because that's what we called it in the other town I was in. But I was so surprised how professionally run the senior center is in this town, and what a great impression it makes on someone like myself. You're always recognized, and there's so many things for you to do, and they pay a lot of attention. That takes a lot of work, because my profession was in teaching management before. And I just want to say as a new citizen in a very short time, I'm really impressed with the job they do, and remember that constitutes what the character of the town is. Not only the young children in the school, but the senior centers, and that's gonna be an increasing force. The other thing, when you're talking about these two roles, it's amazing to me that they're not full-time. I'm a Korean veteran myself. I didn't serve in Korea, but I served during the time of that conflict to support the troops over there. And boy, if any one of you want to deal with the Veterans Administration, I welcome that. If you want to be on the phone for hours, I can't believe that these two roles aren't critical roles in this town. And you have a wonderful director and reporter, and she's been very kind and professional to me. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you so much. I skipped over Ron Griffin at the beginning, and I'd like to fit Ron in here now. Ron had some things to add on a veteran who was just recently found from World War II that we want to recognize.
So I'm guessing we've concluded this subject.
We have. Thank you.
For this week.
Excuse me, do we now have permission
To the extent you're asking us, yes, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Could I ask, just, and this is just me learning the rookie selectman, how do we actually go about hiring people? I mean, I know fire chief and police chief, there's assessment centers and all that, but in terms of how the town actually makes its decisions to hire people in departments, what's the process?
I work with the department heads and run the hiring process.
So is there a panel that, I mean, like, there's a panel that looks at
Put a
that?
panel together depending on what the job is, and then develop questions for
Okay.
those candidates.
Okay, just learning. Thanks.
And you advertise accordingly, where if it's a public works job, there
Yeah,
are public
that part,
works
I just wasn't
publications.
sure, given you're asking us if you can do it, it's like, gosh. Guess I ought to know how the process works.
The answer is yes.
So for the record, technically you are the hiring and firing authority
Yeah.
for the town. I do it on your behalf, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, I'm sorry.
So what I wanted to say is I wanted to refer to the POWMIA chair. And I was going to do this in opening remarks when we had a moment of silence. And I was going to talk about that chair is, what it does is remember all of those who served our country and whose whereabouts and is unknown. But today, Massachusetts has one less missing in action veteran. And his name is Lieutenant Richard Horowitz. He was lost on February 28th, 1945, when his B-24 went down in the mountains over northern Italy. So he has returned. His remains have been found, and he was buried in West Roxbury, and he's originally from Canton, and he was buried in West Roxbury on Sunday. So I was going to ask to extend that moment of silence to include him, his family, and the 72,990 other MIA POWs still from World War II alone.
All right, we'll have a moment of silence then for him and for those other 72,000 then. Thank you. So now we're moving on a little late to Facilities Director Jerry McCarty, Permanent Building Committee, Capital Budget Committee, Medfield Energy Committee, discuss the newly drafted 20-year capital plan. Thank you, Jerry, for the 558 pages.
It's mostly pictures.
Good evening. I'm Jerry McCarty, and Director of Facilities. And just to let some quick background, I'm coming up on a year working in the town of Medfield. So it's basically the Director of Facilities is me. So that's why it's a little late getting this report, because this is done on weekends and nights, because when it comes to town, we're sort of, at this point in time, we've been in crisis mode. We've been taking care of problems as the highest priorities are occurring, you know, failures, leaks, this, that, and the other thing is putting out fires. Obviously, the plan is the step to go forward, and this plan we'll be probably working with, in conjunction with the Permanent Building Committee, because there's a lot of these issues are not routine, the day-to-day routine repairs. These are large components, roofs, boilers, items that would be publicly bid. So that's why we'll need a permanent building committee, because it'll be bigger items. The plan is a combination of site inspections, looking at and gathering information from past reports, outsourced engineer we had come in to take a look at certain aspects of the buildings, and then unit pricing is based on estimated guides, my knowledge of public bidding, and my experience, because I've done a lot of this, and then reaching out to some of the contractors. What the report does do, it does not anticipate program changes. So if you're asking about what's going to go there, if we make the school big, all it's doing is looking at existing items, life cycle of an existing item, what it's going to cost to repair that existing item, and when I anticipate it to reach the end of its life cycle. So that's how the report is formulated. A couple key items is we have a couple buildings that are over 100 years old. We have several buildings that are 50 years old, over 50 years old. And per the assessor's records, the asset value of all the buildings in town is $106 million. So I just want to go to the report. I'm not going to go into the detail, because obviously we're not going to get it. But how, and again, this is a draft, because there's some comments, and I was sitting down with PBC members. They had some comments on this as well. But how to look at this report is
Jerry, you just use initials, what members?
PBC, Permanent Building Committee.
Okay,
I'm
thank
sorry. Is excuse me. So how to look at the report is and when you look at the report, if you go to page 9, and you don't have to write it now, but page 9 is an example. I've identified a building, and on the page 9 is the town hall. And so how it's formatted, it's an industry type of standards formatting. It talks about, it has sections. Section 2 is site conditions. Section 3 goes into building facades, superstructure, building envelope. Section 4 goes into HVAC, plumbing, heating, electrical, and it's broken down into that segment. So when you look at the reports, when you see a section, that's what it's referring to. It's just to identify it consistently through all the buildings. At that report on page 49, I give a 20-year layout in an Excel spreadsheet. On the left-hand column is all the building, identify all the sections of the building that's anticipated, name the components. And then, obviously, the top is the years going out. And when I anticipate end of a life cycle, just for illustrative purposes, we talk about a boiler, brand new boiler. You can anticipate a boiler to be in the 25 to 30-year range. And that's what it would be. So looking at that report, so if you see a boiler for 2025, I've taken into account when that boiler was installed, when it's anticipated. Some things in there will be shorter lifespans, because after going out and viewing the boiler, shall we say, it's obviously it's had several major repairs, and its life cycle is obviously going to be shorter than an industry standard. Excuse me, sorry. And so when you see the dollars on the page, they are current dollars. On the bottom of the page, you'll see there's an escalation factor for each year going out. So you'll see that obviously 2030 dollars are different than 2017 dollars. How to view the spreadsheet? When you're looking at the spreadsheet, that's not gospel. Obviously, what I anticipate, what the industry anticipates a motor to last or a boiler to last. And you might look at it and say, geez, that looks expensive. You can quibble over the cost. This is my pass at a cost on these things. What shouldn't be lost is that item exists, it will fail, and it will cost money. You can, when it fails the exact year or the exact dollar cost, but you can anticipate it. That's what this report is trying to do, is trying to anticipate a future need. And the report also goes into, and I don't want everybody, sometimes you can look at it and you freak out with the number. It anticipates all items. So, so using this as a carpet, you say, when I install a carpet in an institutional facility, a carpet can last 10 to 15 years. It might last 32. You might say, I'm gonna put the carpet there until it's threadbare. I just say, carpet's gonna last you 10 to 15 years. You're gonna replace it as an entirety in the building, not piece by piece by piece. You can do it piece by piece by piece, but again, for this illustrative purpose for planning, I didn't. I just said, here's what it is, here's when it was installed, here's when you anticipate it to be replaced in its entirety, and here's what it would cost would be. So you gotta look at the report. There are items, though, in there that you will be anticipating fairly soon, and the big items. Mainly, there's several roofs in town, a couple of schools, the rubber roof on the library. The slate roof, we did the repairs, the slate roof's fine. It's the rubber, it's the part that's hidden. We had the roof engineer come out and look at that. Several of these roofs are at the end of their life cycle. All the roofs were installed roughly around the same time at several of the schools. Or when they did the school, a portion of the school was done, but not the other half of the building. Well, that other half is coming to the end of its life cycle. That's where the biggest amount of money I see in the next several years for this town would be, is a roof and roof replacement program. Because it's this year, this fiscal year, I addressed $40,000 worth of roof repair. I had, and actually I've spent $52,000, $12,000 of it from my operational budget, because we had roof failures, and I had to address them. Obviously, I got to keep water out of the building. And I anticipate another capital request this year because of more roof repairs that we've identified, more leaks, more damage, and obviously we have to address that. So it comes down, the next question a lot of people ask is, what's the priority? Well, there's priorities everywhere. So the biggest thing is, who determines the priority? That's where we need the PBC to come in, because I can determine priorities, but it might not be basically it's a political decision, because you're saying, well, this one's over this one, and who, Jerry McCarty likes this person better, so he's going to assign the money. It's not that. I have to take what's more prudent for the town to address. So, quite frankly, it is about me. So what's going to make my life easier, quicker? Take care of that leaky roof. That's out of my hair. That's one less worry I have. So that's why the PBC is going to be critical in this process, because I think they're the town representatives, town citizens, and they can give us some better input on that. As well as, then I go back to I have some findings on this report. Excuse me. And the findings, these are my findings. And you notice in those findings, none of them are talking about repair. Basically, the findings are you need to spend some money for a little more developed research on some of these issues, because they're big issues, and so it's going to take engineering, not just me. There's some decision making that's going to need to be done on the Dale School. Whether disregard the use of the Dale School, it's an asset that you own. It has been deferred for many years. There's some issues that are cropping up really, really quick and really soon. And so the town as a whole is going to make a decision of how you want to address that asset. What the use is doesn't make a difference. You just got to protect it. the third, one of the third issue I have in the findings was the roofs. Again, the roofs, because that's a big issue, it's a big expense, and everything's coming, again, timing's coming where all these roofs will need to be addressed fairly soon. And again, that goes into how you want to address it. Do you bond it all at once? That's a decision the permanent building committee will need to weigh in on, and again, with other further research. And then the last one I have done this in another town, is create a capital repair reserve account with a continuing balance. And what it did in this town, the town decided that to have a lump sum that every year appropriated as an operational expense, whatever that dollar value. The town I worked for was $500,000. That's the decision making by whoever wants to make that. But that $500,000 is part of is part of an operational expense. And what happens is I come up with a plan, reviewed with the PVC, and saying, here's the items we want to address for this $500,000, and whatever the value is. And you do it as an operational. So every year, the facilities has this much money accounted for to address building needs. Because the time, and this is not a criticism of the town operation, but if every year I have to go in for $40,000 for a roof, every year I'm going for, I know it's going to be $40,000 a year for a roof until we replace them. It just seems like it's a repetitive action that it's going to occur. Same with failures of HVAC equipment. I know we'll be replacing motors, or I come up with a plan that's a pre-approved. If the money doesn't get spent, it gets rolled forward in this other town, because sometimes you can't do all the work because time constraints, bidding, whatever. The money gets forward, and so we have that. It develops a lack of a better term, a reserve. So when the boiler, this town I work for, when the state came out with a program for boiler replacement, we had the monies so we could jump on that, and so we did a $1 million boiler replacement with a $500,000 rebate from the state, because we were shovel ready, because we anticipated that boiler. It was part of the program. We just accelerated that. We had the money to address it, and with the state reimbursement at the end. So that's the essence of how I did the report, how I approached the report, and then again, when you look at it, I just caution everybody, just you look at it, it looks like big numbers, but again, it's taken everything and looking at it as individual items, and they add up. Again, you can defer things for as much as you want or as little as you want, but but there's some bigger issues that will have to be addressed fairly soon, and quite frankly, that would be the roofs. I think would be the biggest one I see come down the line.
Questions?
Jerry, a couple of things. Could you just touch on the energy section of your capital plan and how that ties in with the capital maintenance? And the other thing I was wondering, reading through this, it seems to me some of the items that you're recommending would be considered ordinary maintenance in the course of the operating budget for the building, and other items would be capital items as we generally address in the capital budget. How do you distinguish between what's ordinary maintenance and what's a capital item?
Ordinary maintenance is, I'll break it down to the simplest terms, is you're fixing toilet flushometers, you're anticipating, you're buying filters, you're changing. These capital issues were generally are items probably in excess of $10,000 to $15,000 replacement. A unit ventilator. It's not an operational issue. To change the valve on the unit ventilator, that's a normal maintenance. But a unit ventilator that's completely failed is a capital request, because I would budget a couple $1,000s a year for valve replacements or whatever the anticipation. I'm not anticipating a total component failure. These are what would be bigger items. That wouldn't be, again, the day-to-day routine or small, get a contractor. And these are something that would be publicly bid projects that far exceed a normal maintenance program.
In the energy section?
Oh, the energy section, what happens is the town has, in the appendix, you'll see the town has done several reports on several of these buildings. They're only a couple of years old, some of them are 10 years old. A lot of the stuff hasn't been enacted on, no fault of anybody, just they get the reports. In that, they identified energy items in those reports. Not only are the energy items just for the sake of energy, but they're also tied to facade repairs, facade replacements, because in some of the instances, some of the facades have had problems because the energy is leaking out, water vapor has attacked the building, and it's breaking down the bricks. So if you're gonna fix one issue, you address both at the same time. These issues have been identified as energy issues. The Energy Committee is also with the town as a green communities. There are some programs that once we get on the track, we can propose to the state that this would fit into the Energy Committee's goals. Submit to the state if they concur that this is a program that would deserve some rebate monies. We would perform the project and then submit that as an energy for a rebate of whatever the percentage they determine.
Lee?
Good evening. I'm Lee Alinsky. I'm the chairman of the Energy Committee. Just a couple of things. First of all, when we became a green community, we were awarded, I believe, $138,000.
48.
$148,000 to do some initial projects. As part of as part of becoming a green community, we had to prepare a 5-year plan for things that we would like to accomplish in terms of saving energy for the town. That plan, known as Schedule 4, and it's available. I can give it to you. Lists all of the initial projects that need to be done from purchasing all of the street lights and relamping them with LEDs, which we hope to be able to do in the near future. To do a lot of the reconditioning for the HV.
Retro commissioning HVAC of the high school, middle school. I can jump in, Lee, and I'll just let you know that is a capital item that would be in my program that would tie into the Energy Committees in the Green Communities Act.
We've also started looking out further than the 5-year plan to looking at what we're going to, if we can finally get a ruling on the dump, and whether or not the cap on the dump is going to be grandfathered in or accepted, or whether there's some cost to that. We're looking at solarizing, putting panels out at the senior center, in the high school and middle school parking lots. We have a number of things that we've started to talk about for activities, for projects later on. Hopefully some of these can be done before the next 5 years, but the original Green Communities plan incorporates those initial 5 years, and I'd be glad to give the schedule to Christine, and then come back at your convenience and discuss the items individually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, do you have any, I'm sorry, do you have any questions at this point, or have I just totally confused the issue more?
No, that's helpful, thank you.
Okay.
I'll just glom onto that. Again, in my capital plan, there is a couple things like the middle school water heater is reaching end of its life cycle. That has also been identified under that table 4 Lee was just talking about as an energy saving item that we would in a future year seek funding from the green communities for reimbursement for that replacement. So we try to do things in tandem with the capital, because obviously if I can extend the town's buck and do the work and then get some monies back from the state, obviously. That
Jerry, isn't the way that it works that we have to spend the $148,000 that we got in our first grant before we can start applying for these other?
That is correct. And
DOER grants?
where we are with that right now is we have petitioned to the state a couple of items, as Lee commented on, and we submitted that in May. The state got back to us 2 weeks ago and said, we have more questions. So we're trying, and we're trying to get them to move a little quicker. And so our consultant, who was helping us with that, has got back to them, and hopefully we can get that ball moving on that initial expenditure.
No question. I have several comments, so
Sure, go ahead,
I'll
Gus.
start.
Yeah, please.
I have comments and questions. So this is one of the first reports where an executive summary got me fired up. And then the actual report was so good, it calmed me back down. So the bottom line is, I think this is an excellent report. If I were in your shoes, having the kind of pictures and detailed analysis by building that's in here, I think is tremendous. So for all the work that it took to do the report.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, without a doubt. The issue I had with the executive summary is that a lot of what it said was vague in general and didn't provide specifics. So I got my hackles up with that because I wanted to know what the points were that were being made, and they were only made in the most general terms. Another piece I had with the report, and you don't have to edit this, now that we've got this, this is feedback, just
Sure.
so you know.
Well, appreciate it.
There were things like identifying the town hall as being more than 100 years old because it was built in 1900 that I didn't find useful, because there's, yes, historically that's perhaps true, but it doesn't inform me in thinking about what we have to do to put into the building when I know that this is what the building looks like. The refurbished date is for me, would have been more useful to understand how many years has it been since we really did the full-up fix, because that effectively, in my mind, I'm suggesting makes it almost a new building, and that's what we should be looking at. So that's just a reaction to one person reading the executive summary. I had a couple of reactions. Some of this is relevant to the warrant committee too. When I look through the details of the kinds of things that were called out, as you said, it's all in here, kitchen sink. My first reaction was, well, wait a minute, this is assuming that the departments haven't, what's the department's responsibility for maintaining their buildings already, and I'm in a budgeting mode here. There's already money going into budgets to help maintain buildings, and I sure hope that we don't have department heads that didn't think they had to worry at all about doing anything in the buildings that they've been given. So partly I'm trying to say, what are the implications of this report for our capital spending demands? I'm assuming that there will be a bigger recognized number for capital spending on building upkeep than what we have explicitly recognized for as long as I've been involved in town budgets. So I'm not suggesting how do we keep that number down and not change. I'm guessing it's going to go up, but I'm trying to figure out, if I look at your numbers, which, as you said, they were just assuming everything's there, what's the implication for our capital spending on facilities? It occurred to me that we may want, from a budgeting standpoint, to manage the facilities capital budgeting separate from the other capital budgeting. So we actually have that visibility. We're using a 20 or 30-year perspective on it, and it's there, and people know why it's there. I like your idea of establishing a reserve account that basically puts a fixed amount in that's designed to fit your profile. Kind of the way that the water and sewer try to program or anticipate in their rates what they're raising for capital. I like that idea. I would suggest inside that account, there might only be one reserve account. Mike, you'll know how much we can do there. We may actually internally manage it building by building, but in a mass account or something like that. So I like that direction. It seemed to me that from a budgeting standpoint, that piece should be separate from our normal replacement of the fire engine kind of stuff. So that's just a thought.
I have a response to that at some point, Gus, if you want to.
Yep, go ahead.
No, you can finish
Oh.
your comment. I'm just going to put a marker on that to come back
Okay,
to that.
okay. The other piece that, as I was, and again, I was trying to picture the budgeting issue here. I was sitting there saying, all right, there's routine maintenance. There's some, I guess my question was, are you, for all the things you call out in this report, are we looking to the facilities manager to be responsible for all that stuff? Or should we have a definition of the responsibility of what the town facilities manager is responsible for? And where I was coming from is, you have stuff in here about cracks of the asphalt in the parking lot across the street. And I'm saying, that sounds to me like something the highway department ought to just be taking care of. They may not yet, but that ought to not be on your shoulders, that ought to be theirs. You have things about, we have certain handicap parking spots that don't have the signpost and the sign, and I'm saying, that's not at a level, I mean, I understand it's an expense, but it seems to me that's something that ought to be managed within the building or the owner of the building themselves, rather than, again, throwing, and that's part of what makes your numbers big, is some of these $2,000 and $3,000 items. So I had that reaction. And then the other one is a question. Question and a comment. You don't have, I know you don't have the public safety building and the new garage, but if we're gonna build in this kind of programming of long-term expenses, which I'm totally on board with, then they need to be in there as well. It just happens to be they don't put any demand on us maybe for the first 5 years, and then they will.
I just, basically, I ran out of time, quite
No,
frankly.
no, no, yeah, it sounded like you're planning to do it, but here's my
volume
question.
2.
The public safety, the DPW, the Dwight Derby, and the historical building behind the,
you're in-
behind the library. I just
Okay.
ran
But
out
not
of
the
time.
Lowell
And in the water sewer treatment plant
Okay.
building.
But not the Lowell Mason House. I'm not advocating, I'm just trying to understand. Okay.
Town doesn't own it.
Peak House?
Not anticipated that the town will.
Okay, so those are things are all, okay, so the issue is you're gonna capture all the buildings, because I did have a question about the Historic Society and the Dwight. So all of the things the town owns will ultimately be picked up in this, regardless of whether they support town operations per se, or if they're just assets.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just gotta identify the asset, and it's,
Okay.
I'll be
Okay.
asked to fix it, so.
Okay. So, my bottom line is I was trying to handicap the budgets and understand what piece should stay with the departments that own the buildings, what should be pulled out of those department budgets that's already budgeted for facilities management, that should be consolidated.
Well, I could just, it already is. This year, it's under me. So what happens is, so that's why I'm running around. What happens is, if there's a problem with the COA, Roberta calls Jerry, I get a problem, myself
Yeah.
or my vendor, we go down there, and we look into it, we get it resolved, we get it fixed. As far as routine maintenance, we have scheduled that. We have a new employee, he started roughly about a month ago, that works for me on the town side, and he's gonna be doing filter changes. So the routine maintenance is captured right now.
Okay.
And it was pulled out. I'll say, it's a new budget, so we're tracking it very closely, so we can come back and say,
So
Numbers
I'll,
right.
knowing the people on the warrant committee, I will trust them to smoke out any remaining facilities budgets that are in the departments that actually belong there, so that we don't just gotta have a windfall.
no, I think we're
increase.
pretty
Okay.
good right
Okay.
now, so, quite frankly.
Okay,
but-
and I absolutely am on board with reserve. I think first, when I started the warrant committee, the very first question I think I ever asked Mike in my first year was, do we have any way of establishing reserve accounts for long-term expenses? So I'm totally on board with that.
When we finished the town hall, I called the Mass Department of Revenue and asked them if I could set up what I think in business they call a depreciation account. And I was told that if we did, we'd be the only community in the state of Massachusetts that had one, and therefore they would not let us do it. And I'm saying, well, you tell us you want us to act like a business, and then when we try to act like a business, you tell us you can't. I said, you treat us like babies. You can't trust us, we can't do anything
So
ourselves, but.
if we can set up a reserve account,
Yes.
we can run our own Excel spreadsheet behind that actually does the depreciation calculations.
I
and the
think
state never
Governor-
finds out, what do I care?
Governor Baker's Municipal Modernization Act did include provisions that allow you to set up stabilization funds for any purpose, and I think this is probably a very good use of that. It's either that or our 53.5 reserve account. I think the decision has to be made of, do you want to allow the Permanent Building Committee and the facilities manager to be able to spend from this during the year? Or do you want to have an annual appropriation process through the town meeting? And I think probably it's best to allow the building committee and the facilities manager the discretion to expend from that during the course of the year as the need arises, rather than having to wait until the annual town meeting.
If it's feasible to do it, I would think authorizing the expenditures in accordance with the documented programming of those expenditures would be, I don't know whether you have to still endorse that every year or not, but if there's a way to basically say, look, we raised money based on this programming, this is what's programmed for this year, you can spend up to that amount. If you don't need it, don't spend it and roll it forward, but that would seem to be
If I may, in this other town, what happens is they had a 20-year capital plan, and we did a three, we had, people call it a 3-year capital, but it was, we had priorities 1, 2, and 3. And the reason being is because, again, we anticipated the end of life cycle stuff. So what happens is, obviously, the goal was I would identify all the issues that I'm going to address in as priority 1. Having said that, halfway during the season, something was a priority 3 broke down. Obviously, I held on. I said, well, we're not going to do this year. We're going to pull that forward, and so it was a rearranging. And at that point, I was dealing. It was dealing with the permanent building committee and the town manager. So and as long as we kept on following with it, here's the plan we presented, and here it is. Because again, this plan was presented to both the school committee and the selectmen.
So my last question then is that at the point in time when we've completely vetted this, scrubbed it, moved whatever, kept whatever belongs on your shoulders, moved whatever doesn't off, designated those responsibilities wherever they go, pulled budgets back, built budgets up, and done everything, I'm anticipating that there will be a capital expenditure requirement for buildings maintenance, which is going to represent a large pill, one way or the other. Even if we do a good job of making it as small as possible, it's going to be a large pill that the town is going to have to figure out how to swallow. Are you going to be ready to deliver that pill this April, or is it going to take at least another year?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one because let me just tell you, it's people look at me and say, well, it's going to be school heavy. Well, there's your biggest buildings in town. They're the most used buildings in town. They have several hundred kids walking through the buildings. They get so it becomes school. It's going to become school heavy. So what happens is that becomes my experience has been in other towns that we got to develop a plan that addresses all buildings. So what happens is we try to in the other town we basically proportion it that spending, say, as a 60-40. Out of that, again, this town was $500,000. It was anticipated that 60% of that was going to be towards school repairs and 40%
So you're trying to put a sweet coating on the pill that I'm talking about that's going to happen.
Hey,
That's
Gus?
okay. Yeah.
Can I chime in?
Sure.
Okay. Mike Quinlan, Chair of the Permanent Building Committee. What Jerry's put together here, and you kind of stole my thunder, it is a phenomenal document, and he should be commended. He spent many hours putting this together, and it's so valuable. But this is the ugly truth. This is years and years of deferred maintenance that's gone unchecked, and this is really just telling you the story. Here's the problem. I don't think right now we're at a point, this is just sort of the first draft, we're not at a point where we can say, here's a definitive plan to cover everything for the next 20 years. This is the first approach to it, and to say, this is what we've uncovered to date. I personally don't see this as we're going to town meeting in April with, this is the nut, this is how we're solving every problem under the sun, by any stretch. I think this is just to start some conversations. with you, with the warrant committee, and saying, we've got this problem, how are we going to address it? Because it hasn't been addressed, and it's going to keep building if we don't address it in the future.
So that makes sense to me. As a minimum, for example, I think you're going to want to add in the public safety building and the highway department garage. So part of what was behind that is that has to all be done. The reason I asked the question wasn't to crack a whip and try to get you to do it quickly, but I'm anticipating the possibility that in this town meeting, there will be things perhaps associated with the state hospital or other things that could show up. And if we know that if it's not this year that this pill shows up, but it's probably at least a year out, but it is a pill that's going to show up, and it's a pill that's going to give us a 20, 30, actually a continuous obligation that's funded at some level every year. As we hear and consider those discretionary expenditures that we may talk about at this year's town meeting, I'm trying to just get a sense of, it's kind of like we can't forget that that's lurking in the wings perhaps a year out. So.
And I think also this is not to be intended to be a single pill. This is ongoing medication that's going to take years to cure. So it's something that
It's transfusion with
right. Exactly. So but at the very least, we know the problems now, and we can start to address them. We've been diagnosed for a large portion of the town's facilities, thanks to Jerry's hard work. But again, it's going to be an ongoing discussion with warrant committee on a year-to-year basis of how these things get addressed over time.
So, Gus, to the point you raised there, because I after reading this and kind of thinking through the other things that we have, and we can't look at this in isolation, right? We've got to look at this alongside kind of the other things that have traditionally fallen under the capital budget process. So other things of high value that have a known lifespan that are going to have to be replaced. We're going to have to consider it alongside the deferred payments and the accumulated amount of money we owe on OPEB and pensions. We've got to consider it alongside any additional and new programs we're going to do. And so it seems to me that once the other buildings are added in here, I think Mo thinks he's going to have the pavement management software in January. He's got some sort of fleet maintenance situation for the vehicles. I mean, all these things kind of go together. And then, I have always seen this folded into the overall master planning process for the town, that you're going to have master plans in these different categories with an overarching financial master plan. And I think what we should decide, what we then need to do, is then figure out kind of, all right, and I like the way, Jerry, that you map this out into 5-year segments and 10-year segments, 15-year segments. Which of these things do we want to do, right, first of all? Are there some of these things we're going to avoid the maintenance costs, we're just going to scrap the building, or we're just going to move a program someplace else, or we're better off with a new building instead of fixing, whatever it is, here's what we're going to do, right? And then how best to pay for it, right? And so I think, and I've had this view since I was on the capital budget committee, that we need to change the capital budgeting process. Like, it can't be a 1 year, year by year, some number between $350,000 and $500,000. Even if we decide there's going to be a $500,000 reserve account, that will become a number that will be a target every budget season, right? Well, it's 500, but this year will be 425 because, gee, we really got to hire another teacher here, or we've got to hire somebody else here. Then it's 375. I mean, we really have to identify what the overall problem is that we're trying to solve. What do we actually want to do with all of this stuff, combined with all the other obligations that we have, right? I mean, if you combine this stuff with our OPEB obligation, our pension obligation, we're really just talking about stuff that we owe for stuff we've already done, right? Stuff that we owe now that we're not getting anything new for, right? Just for the privilege of continuing to employ the people that we have this big OPEB obligation. We have a big pension obligation. For the privilege of having the buildings we already have, we have this obligation. So it's that sort of the not fun part of it, right? There's nothing new. There's no shiny. There's no ribbon to be cut, right? This is sort of the hard reality we have to figure out. So I think we need to put that all together rather than say, well, here's our plan for the buildings, and then later on maybe if we'll have a plan for the OPEB, and then later on we'll have a plan for something else, and then somebody wants to sell something else to the hospital. And we've kind of got to take this whole collection of potential expenses, figure it out. Because I think there are some things in here. If we have $300,000 worth of roof repairs, that says to me that's something that we should bond. There should be a bond for roofs and do them all together, right? Rather than trying to, you go in to negotiate for 37,000 for this roof and 42 for that roof and 46. And there are other towns that do almost all of their capital spending through debt overrides, right? And as a result, they have a huge amount of unused tax levy, right? Because they squeeze all of that stuff out of their operating budget. They do it through a vote. It's all bonded. And then the good part from a taxpayer standpoint is that it goes away automatically, right? It's not there to just be reallocated to something else the next year. It's gone, right? And so if we're going to have these larger expenditures, it's going to be very hard, number one, to slot them into our existing operating budget. But there's very little room in our operating budget to increase any sort of a capital account. If you're talking about $500,000 for buildings, it's really not there, right? Because at some point, we're going to have to start accounting for our OPEB obligations in our operating budgets. That's going to be a substantial increase. The money is not there in our existing operating budget to do this. And so I think between the Selectmen, the Warrant Committee, the School Committee, once we get the rest of this information, then we're going to have to map out, but potentially with the master plan folks, here's what the plan is. And we're going to pay for some of this through bonding, we're going to pay through some of this. All right, this year in the operating budget, we know 2 years hence, we need to find $1 million for this capital stuff. So everybody knows 2 years from now, everything else is going to get squeezed a little bit because there's $1 million coming in the fiscal year 22 budget for this. And so that's a year, it's going to be a lean year for everything else, right? If you can plan that out and departments can anticipate that in that year, a lot of our growth and a lot of that it's all going to this capital stuff. It's got to be planned out in the future so that people aren't just coming into the budgeting process saying we start with what we had last year. If we have a longer term financial plan around all of this stuff, we'll then be in a position so we know what is coming and it's locked in advance at the beginning of the year. This is a year because we know whatever system it is, right, it's got to be replaced. We've decided it's going to be replaced in the regular tax levy. So starting in the year, there's a line item for $1 million for HVAC in this particular fiscal year, and then every other budget's got to be squeezed under that. So that's what I think is kind of the general process we should follow, and we should talk about the roles of the committees, the Permanent Building Committee, I think the Capital Budget Committee. I think they probably both need to coexist somehow, and maybe it's split between buildings and non-buildings. But if the Capital Budget Committee is going to continue, it's got to be a year-round kind of permanent planning vehicle. Someone's got to be responsible for that overall financial. Ultimately, we're responsible for the plan, but I think in terms of developing it, someone's got to be responsible as kind of the owner of the overall financial plan and how we're going to pay for this stuff.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, thank you.
So this is really great information, Jerry. Thank you so much. It's been lacking, obviously, and so that the thing that jumped out at me was the magnitude of the things that are facing us. And so, as Gus said, it's a bitter pill that we're facing, but we have to do it, and so that we just have to figure out how we're going to do it in which year. Can you maybe put together all of your spreadsheets and give us like a bottom line total of all of the numbers, so that, because that would be very helpful, I think, to know how it then works out over the 20 years in terms of totals. Because those spreadsheets were wonderful. I'm sorry to hear, Jerry, that you do this on weekends. It'd be good if you could get a job where you could actually do it during the week.
This at least you have. That's in there. That's in the.
Okay. So we're up to, on our agenda, we're up to citizen comment. Anybody have a comment?
Anybody sign in this week? Nobody has signed in for ever.
Action items. Mike Quinlan, Chairman, Permanent Building Committee, requests Selectmen review of proposed draft charter for Permanent Building Committee. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. So, kind of dovetailing from our previous discussion, one of the things that we've been in front of you before, trying to move forward again, is a charter for the Permanent Planning and Building Committee. It's a committee that's been sort of formed on an ad hoc basis and hasn't had any real formal governing principles or structure to it. And we've put together a draft, which is just that, it's a draft, seeking additional feedback from you, and also eventually looking for approval really to have this incorporated into town bylaws. Our feel is that the building committee, and especially moving forward with municipal projects and the capital facilities plan that Jerry's put together, that we need to have some structure even beyond each of our individual durations here in town, should we eventually leave, this is sort of a structure to keep it moving forward for all future boards of selectmen and committees, et cetera. So we've basically put together, trying to keep it as simple as possible, not overly restrictive, but really to put together some governing principles on how the committee should be formed and when we should be involved, when we shouldn't be, and how we would function related to different departments and their abilities to seek out projects for themselves when they see a need, or the Board of Selectmen when they see a need for certain planning or building projects. I know for the most part, you guys have seen this before, so I'm really seeking comment from you and looking for direction. I think our next steps, if you approve, would be to go to the bylaw committee as well as review with town council, Mark Sorrell, and really sort of start to refine this into a final draft with the eventual hope of incorporating into the town bylaws.
I seem to recall I gave you some preliminary remarks a long time ago.
I don't recall seeing those. If you could resend them to me, that would be fantastic.
Finding them.
Yeah, or you can come up with new ones. No, my apologies. I'll see if I'll dig through it, but maybe I have it in an archive somewhere, and I'll be in touch offline.
Okay.
Any
Questions, comments?
from the selectmen?
Good. Of course. These are all kind of nitty-gritty, so if you got a copy of it with you there. First,
Do you want this?
No.
You got it.
so start with it says that it's all town-owned buildings, so similar question to what I asked Jerry. So this is going to include Dwight Derby House, the historic building, all the town buildings.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, down on section 1.3. The last sentence is, if volunteer, so as I read it, I hadn't read this before, so
Yep.
it was what I did or didn't understand. It sounded to me like it might be most appropriate to say, if volunteers who are registered voters in Medfield with this expertise are not available, generally talking about volunteers not being available, we kind of qualified who could be on it up front. So I think you mean if we can't find the qualified volunteers that meet the criteria that we started with. So, and I'll give this to you. If you don't want to write it down, you can just take this with you when you're done. All of these are editorial suggestions. They're not, none of this is like fundamental stuff. It said if volunteers who are registered voters in Medfield with this expertise are not available for appointment, the Board of Selectmen shall have the discretion to appoint. It says instead any individual, and my only question was, does that then include town employees? Because they were not allowed on in the earlier part, so we can put in anybody we want, right?
I believe the intention was that it still met the qualifications, meaning that it's still a registered voter. And again, it may be just how it's written.
So what I'm getting,
If
at.
there's authority to appoint non-town voters, registered voters.
So what was confusing me is if a registered voter can volunteer and no one volunteers, then the fact that we have the authority to appoint someone unless we can Shanghai them and require them to be on the committee, that doesn't let us tap a bigger pool than what we started with. So that's the part that confused me.
Well, I think it just means if there's volunteers with the expertise aren't available.
Correct.
You still have to be a registered voter who's not an employee.
The intention was that.
So we would appoint somebody who doesn't have the expertise?
Well, that's if no one with the expertise is available, then we can appoint someone without expertise.
That doesn't make any sense.
So the intention is
So
that.
then we just want to have a committee.
Is that the committee's kind of specialized in that, and what we're saying is it's best to seek out, members that have expertise in architecture, building engineering, municipal construction, or construction law and contracts. There may not always be that option. For instance, there may not always be a volunteer with that area of that level of expertise or that area of expertise. The goal with this paragraph is that if that is the case, the selectmen have the authority to appoint someone who doesn't have that expertise.
Well,
it could just be someone who's volunteering, who may not come from that same background.
so the first line says, among the members, the Board of Selectmen should endeavor to appoint members with expertise in those areas. So you don't need that if we're already, should endeavor means if we can't do it, then we're not gonna do it. To me, what makes more sense is to open up the pool that the board, I would much rather as a selectman be able to appoint someone who has the expertise from a larger pool than our initial target pool, than to pick someone from our initial target pool that doesn't have the expertise, just personally.
So
I'd rather get the
target
expertise
pool
of it.
right now is the entire town of Medfield. So
Yeah, and
you're
so-
saying that that pool would grow to include people outside of town?
It could, if there were somebody with the expertise we need, who's willing to serve, and they don't fit the criteria of what being a taxpayer or something like that. And I would much rather have the expertise on the committee with the willing, if anything, the guy that I have on our ALS study team, Brendan from Rentham, who used to be here, has taught me that if there's smart people from outside town that are willing to volunteer on our committees, we want to let them volunteer, because he's been huge on our committee, so,
That would be a question for a lawyer at this table.
Okay,
Not,
well, Mark, you can.
I'm not the expert in
Mark,
that
you understand
regard.
that. He's still looking for the email that he sent you to start with. So if there's a legal restriction, then fine, but then I think that's a redundant statement, because it already says we're gonna endeavor.
There's a practice in this town more than a legal
So I would rather get the expertise on the committee.
Yeah,
If
I think
we
the
have discretion
concern
to do it.
is, do you have, by bringing someone in out of town, what is their purpose behind, they're not there sort of guarding, they're not paying taxes into the system, so, what is their role in terms of spending taxpayer dollars? And I think this might be some concern about bringing in people from out of town who aren't contributing into the system, and they're just spending everyone's money. I think that's sort of a big concern there.
Question the qualifications of somebody from out of town who would actually want to.
Right. Anybody who's crazy enough to volunteer in another town?
I think that you may want to be allowed to bring in people from different backgrounds and different things. We've brought people from senior groups, and I think it's important, or someone who's, project management, but has no experience in construction at all. So I think it's important to be allowed to bring in other.
Right, and then that's what we're not trying to be so restrictive that it's like just this area of expertise. We're saying basically, this is the preferred expertise because it serves the committee, but there's always times when there are people who can very much help us out.
Then you can strike that entire sentence, because it's redundant against the first sentence that just says selectmen should endeavor.
Okay.
Like if we can't do it, then we're gonna do something else, but, so if there was a point
It
to the
certainly
second
makes
sentence.
the discretion of the selectmen absolutely clear.
Right, I think that was the intention, was just to basically give the selectmen the authority to ultimately decide, but basically encouraging certain areas of expertise for.
Majority of it should be from the construction trades, there's no question.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment. I'm saying that as a selectman, I would rather have the authority to appoint a qualified person with relevant skills wherever I could find them, than simply appoint somebody so I have a body on a board that's not really adding anything.
Sometimes those bodies on the board also act as conduits back to the different groups. I think that's an important thing too. I don't think there's no one's built otherwise,
Okay.
You haven't sold me on that point. Not on a committee like this. This is not public outreach. This is hard decisions about very expensive assets. And I am absolutely in favor of people with skills that can make rational, sound, objective decisions on that. We can have supplemental people to help with outreach, but I would far rather see boards with rock-solid expertise to do the job that they've taken on, especially with something like this, which is major. So, one opinion.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
On 1.5, as configured, there's 5 members. They serve 3 years, and the only issue is, do we need to address staggered terms? How does that work?
Yes, actually, that's a good point. That has come up previously. I have not put that in the draft, but yeah, it would be staggered terms.
Okay.
One thing that's also come up in the past is the possibility of doing longer terms or 5-year terms.
Yeah.
I probably 60-40 on the shorter terms, just because I feel like people generally would fear.
Yeah.
I'm committing to 5 years. I mean, you're not. You can resign at any point, but you know, like I said, I'm not strongly in favor of 3 or 5. If the preference is for a longer term, that's fine too. But you're right, the staggered terms, I will,
I wasn't
put that in
pushing,
there.
I wasn't pushing for anything different. I
No, I
was
know.
just saying specify how it worked,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah,
you
it
knew
would
it
be
was there.
yeah,
Yep.
we can stagger them,
Okay.
yeah.
On 1.10, this is a wordsmith question. The committee shall, subject to appropriation, says conduct feasibility studies, and the only question I had is, should that be commission feasibility studies? Or is the committee literally the one that will do it?
Well, it could be both,
Right.
depending on the situation. And I think by conduct, it's giving us the ability to either perform it in-house
Okay.
if it's something simple, or to possibly commission it if
Okay.
it's something that is too much work for a volunteer committee.
Okay, that's fine. On the paragraph 1.12, as I read that, this is just, again, an editorial comment, somewhere in this document, it seemed to me, when I read that, I started to say, you know what I'd like is a simple flow chart that makes it graphically clear how this process works. So that's just a recommendation for improvement, is that be depicted in a flow chart so that it's clear for anybody that's looking at it. And then the next paragraph, 1.13, again, wordsmithing. If after the completion of a feasibility study, it is deemed by the Board of Selectmen that the proposed construction project is necessary, I wondered whether you should say is advisable. Necessary is an absolute term, and sometimes we build things that are, you know, is Parks and Rec facility necessary? Probably not, but it might be advisable, so.
Understood. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me.
Okay.
In terms of the flow chart, just before we move on to anybody else's comments, I think this is just the first step. Like I said, trying not to be overly restrictive, but the next step would be, once this is somewhat developed, is to dive a little more into the actual process of how each department would approach us, or how the Board of Selectmen would approach us with potential projects, and how we would interact, and how we would interact with Jerry as well throughout that process. So that's also for potential development, but this is more sort of the structure that could then be put into the bylaws, and then without being overly restrictive. We're not here to set just kind of, you know, rigid guidelines. This has to have some fluidity to it.
Mhm.
So I have a few, Pete, do you want to go next?
Why don't you go ahead?
Right, and this may be redundant of some of the comments I gave you last
Yeah.
spring, which I don't remember what they were. And I have
I incorporated a bunch of them, so.
Okay, good. I'm probably going to contradict what I told you at the time. I think I favor a 5-year term with one up per year. I think, like the planning board, this is the kind of entity that would benefit from continuity. And I get the point that people may not want to sign up for 5 years, but I think for the most part, it seems like most members who do join do end up staying for that amount of time or longer. And so I think it would be good, at least aspirationally, to say we're going to have 5, and each one has a term up 1 year. And so that was one comment. Second comment, and I agree with Gus on the expertise issue and the rest of it. I think if we're going to allow, I mean, we may not have anybody interested in doing this who's out of town, but I don't know about the town employee. I think it's probably better not to have a town employee on this committee if we can avoid it. But I could see making an exception to the residency requirement. You could have somebody who has a business in town, somebody who works in town, having an interest in this and sort of seeing it as a way they might contribute to the community that they work in, even if they don't live in it. I think we should define in another paragraph what the facilities master plan is. And it says that the committee is responsible for maintaining a facilities master plan with a prioritized list of future needs. And I think this was a comment that I had before. I think we ought to put in a requirement of either how often it's going to be updated. And I think what I had suggested, or if I didn't suggest it before, I'm suggesting now, would be every 5 years or upon completion of a project under its jurisdiction. So you complete a project under your jurisdiction, you're going to update then the facilities master plan. And we should probably put some length of time in a 20-year plan, 15-year plan, whatever the number is, 30-year plan based on what Jerry gave us, so that there's some direction to the committee in the future saying, okay, here's the plan, we gotta do it every 5 years. If we do a project, then we update it at the completion of that project, and that's 5 years running out from there. I think those are the only other comments. I think this is as strong as it needs to be to make it clear that any project has to go through the permanent building committee. I think that's kind of the goal, is to set it up as really the gatekeeper of these kind of projects, that we can't have sort of kind of an ad hoc process around buildings that, and I think 1 I gave some thought to it. I think 1.12 gets it there. It says that if they shall file a project application, meet with the department, and I think.
I was actually looking at this. I recall that was one issue I had, whether they actually should file with the Board of Selectmen, who would then refer it, as opposed to just strictly from a control standpoint, whether the Board of Selectmen should be the one, and then the Board of Selectmen would refer it to
I'll agree with that.
you, and then you'll take it from there, rather than somebody just unilaterally deciding on a project, and it's off and running before the Board of Selectmen even know it exists.
Yep. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
All right. Fine with that, too. Yeah, I think my primary concern is just that there be a clear process, and there's sort of no way to sort of jump the line.
Yep, and ultimately, you know, we're looking at the Board of Selectmen as the ultimate executive authority in this town to tell us which ones, or which projects they want to take some next steps on, and which don't require our attention.
Anything else, Mike?
Oh, that was it?
Okay. I guess I appreciate you guys doing this. I think it makes a lot of sense to codify it, and I think I would fall in line with Mike's suggestion of the 5-year terms, just for the reasons that he stated. The one issue that comes to my mind, and it has to do with the Council on Aging, which basically claims that they have their own money to do their own building, and should we make them go through these steps? I think it still makes sense for them to have to do it, even where they're not using town funds. Still, it becomes a town structure, a town building, and so that I think we want them to.
Right, I think
to go through
regardless of
these.
funding source, it's a town-owned asset, so
Yep.
any modifications to it should be overseen by committee.
Just
Yep.
anecdotally, that project was one of the less smooth ones, and it had nothing to do with the town people, but between the contractor we had on that and the architect, that project was one of the more difficult ones, considering the magnitude was significantly less than like DPW or public safety.
One of the things with the report that we got on the capital plan, one of the things that struck me was how many of the fairly recent projects are buildings that are having a lot of problems now, or having a lot of expenses that are facing us. It's just sort of startling to me that,
Doesn't startle me at all.
yeah, well, the numbers startled me and
Deal with
that we're
the-
facing.
Deal with public construction on a regular basis, it's startling that there aren't even more.
Yep.
It's just really,
Can you
it's not.
expound on that? I'm not exactly sure what you meant by that, Pete. About the recent projects having the most expenses?
Well, the Council on Aging facility has
Oh.
doors that don't work, the slopes are not right, I mean, there are things about the renovation at the townhouse and at the library renovation, they're just, the schools,
I
the
thought you
high
meant
school and the Blake
DPW
Middle
or
School.
Public safety. Just
Well,
getting
no, those,
scared there.
the public safety and the garage weren't covered by that. Hopefully, they're fine, but,
I had made
I
it,
mean, I don't think of the library renovation or this building's renovation as being that old.
Right.
And yet, we're,
Bill's got a comment.
yeah, all right. Yes, Mr. Massaro.
I just had a question, we talked about.
Can you
all
find the
buildings.
microphone up in the
microphone's
front
right
row
there.
there, please?
When you talked about all buildings, I'm just curious if that you're including the hospital buildings as well. They are town-owned buildings, there are repairs, things going on up there now.
Jerry's calculator didn't go out that far.
Well, let's see, we've got till what, March?
It's the 100-year plan.
Yeah.
I think the ultimate, our vision of it is that once there is an actual plan for the hospital, once there's a plan in place, and if there are then town-owned facilities as part of that plan that are meant to be long-term town assets, then yes, we could be involved in any in overseeing any renovations, any major capital projects up there. In terms of its current allocation and it kind of being in limbo, we're happy to help, but I don't think we were looking to sort of step in and take control of anything.
And I'm not asking you to either. I mean, I'm just, it's just something you need to keep on your radar, I think, is,
Yep, it's a good
and I
point.
don't see whatever happens up there. It's possible, but I don't think it's likely that it'll happen all at once. And so, you know, you'll have a mix of developers who are working on a building, and then you'll have other buildings next to them that you may have some desire to keep from pulling down the attractiveness and value of the other buildings that are up there, so you may need to spend maintenance money or what have you.
At first glance, though, I don't think that's what should go in under a permanent building committee.
Again, and I'm not suggesting it, just to keep in mind for, you know, longer term.
The significant factor on the buildings that have been constructed with the permanent building committee, starting with the 3-school project, have had the least problems in my experience. It's because there's people in that committee that do that in their everyday work and they know what they're doing. It's absolutely critical in these public construction projects, number one, that the OPM is critical, the owner's project manager, that you get an architect that has experience with public construction projects, and then most critically, that you vet, you precondition to the extent possible, or pre-qualify to the extent possible, your general contractors, and then vet them thoroughly before you award the contract. And when that doesn't happen, you have problems like the senior center. In that case, the permanent building committee was not involved. I had some casual contact with the architect. I said, do not put the bid documents out on the street without my seeing them. He ignored my instruction. They went out on the street. There was no pre-qualification requirements for the GC, and guess what? This was the GC's first public construction project. And it was all downhill from there. And it was a very small project by any standards.
Bill, on the state hospital property, the only buildings that I could see under the current plan that could come under the permanent building committee would be if, in fact, the town endorses some form of an arts and culture center. And I'm talking about on the campus, you know, if there's a Parks and Rec facility down South Hospital Road, that's another one. But the only buildings, I think, in the plan that would not be an issue of the town leasing land, or if there were town-owned housing that presumably would transfer to a housing authority, the only buildings I can imagine that would go to the permanent building committee under the current concept would be potentially an arts and culture center. I don't think there's anything else.
No, my thought was, though, that, again, in a phased development, if you do in fact have a phased development, there will be other buildings that, you know, you may have decided you need to stabilize, you need to upkeep, you need to keep from deteriorating worse.
Yeah,
So
but
you need to look at that.
the town has to do that, but not the permanent building
Yeah,
committee.
and that's fine. Again, what you said all.
I got it.
And I just wanted to clarify what was in or out of that all. You would also, if, for example, if your Affordable Housing Trust should do something with town land for some kind of a affordable housing project or whatever use it might be, I guess I would assume that would come under the committee as the Permanent Building Committee, perhaps.
Themselves.
I mean, if you're donating the land, for example, to a developer, I mean, is the committee gonna want?
No, probably not. That would be more, again, it would be only if the town were owning.
The trigger is, if it's subject to Chapter 149 or Chapter 7, the public procurement laws. So, for instance, the senior center, if they raise their own money, that still will be subject to Chapter 149, based on my understanding. So, yeah. So I think that's the trigger. So even, you know, if it falls under that, we would expect that it would come under the building committee. And it kind of leads to what Mark was saying, that that's a very regulated process that requires that attention.
So for the Affordable Housing Trust, then, if the trust were working through a commercial developer, like we probably would be the case, that wouldn't be an issue at all. If the trust commissioned some sort of a town financed, you know, extension to Tilden Village or whatever, that would fall. Yeah, it's a house, well, that's what I'm getting. I'm trying to picture a scenario where the Affordable Housing Trust would do something that would have to go on. Okay.
They're not subject to chapter 149.
Yeah, I'm just
If
making,
you
just
actually
making
went
sure.
back and look at
Allendale, yeah.
Allendale, you know, that kind of a model, that would fall under it.
But I think that was done through a community development corporation.
It was, that's correct, which is a much more efficient way to do it, because they're not constrained by all this stuff.
Anything else? So, next steps then,
So,
you're gonna
thank
do
you
a
all for your
revision
comments.
for us?
Yeah, I'll incorporate some things. I'll touch base with town council. And if someone can get me a contact with the bylaw committee to engage them for review. I don't know who that is or when the last time was they met, so
What's Scott McDermott?
Mike or Christine, maybe somebody could get me.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's listed in the town report.
I might be able to tell you right now.
That's okay. I'll forget, just email me.
I'll email you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming,
Thanks,
Mike. Next, Town Council Mark Sorrell requests the Selectmen vote to authorize action regarding encroachment issue within Rockwood Lane, the basketball
By way
hoop.
of clarification, I'm just bringing it to your attention to take what action you feel is necessary. This was brought to my attention by Mo. He had sent out correspondence to which there was no response. There is a basketball pole and the whole shebang that was installed physically within the right-of-way. So you have authority. People are not supposed to put things in the right-of-way without permission. So it's brought to your attention for whatever you want to do.
And I have concerns about this, having talked to Mo and about it, that it's a precedent-setting event. When somebody goes ahead without asking permission, just on their own, tears up a town sidewalk, and puts in something that could be a potential hazard in the public way. You know, everybody that lives on a cul-de-sac always tells us, I want to live on a cul-de-sac so my kids can play hockey and soccer and basketball. Well, you're going to have a lot more cul-de-sacs if you do that. I think you have to be careful what you allow to go within the public way. Now, some people put the temporary basketball where they wheel them in their driveway at the end of the season, put them in their garage. But this is a permanent structure that's been cut into the sidewalk and cemented in.
And
And I think it's yeah.
and they've been asked to remove it and they've refused?
The what?
They've been asked to remove it?
There's no response to Mo's letter.
They ignored it. They haven't responded, period.
Yeah, I went out and looked at the hoop on Sunday, when I got the memo. And I think Mark clarified, we're not obligated to do this. The memo says we're obligated to remove it, we're not obligated to remove it. It's within the discretion of the selectmen for what to do. So I went out there on Sunday, I looked at the basketball hoop, it cuts slightly into the curb. You wouldn't even necessarily know unless you went right up to, that it was actually in the road. I didn't see any problem with it. Yes, they should have asked permission in advance. I'm sure they would have been told no, because that's not what's done. You know, they're gonna put, I spoke to the people in the cul-de-sac while they were out there on Sunday. They said they're gonna put reflective tape on the hoop in the winter, so the plow guys can see it. As I read the statute, if a plow hits it and it further damages the road, we can order it removed and assess the owners at the time. Am I right about that? There's no timetable to act now. If we decide now not to do it, we can do it in the future if we need to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
correct.
And so there's no adverse possession? There's no claim that
They're
they're
not gonna have a continuing, it's like mailboxes. It's the same, it's equivalent to mailboxes. Virtually all mailboxes are in the public way.
yeah.
And what happens is, you know, from the flip side is mailboxes get damaged by our plows, and then they want the town to do something about it, and we periodically have this discussion about the fact that you don't have a right to have the mailboxes there, and we're not liable for any damage. So this is just another manifestation of it.
And look, if a plow hits it and the plow gets damaged, we can assess the owners for
And
it.
frankly, you know, if you ask me, if you're so inclined to adopt any kind of a policy, I would say that people ought to make application to you. You ought to take it up on a case-by-case basis, and they ought to sign a license agreement with the town that would clarify the fact that you know, they'll indemnify and hold us harmless if a third party gets injured. They'll carry insurance, all those sorts of things, anytime somebody is allowed to do something in the right of way other than walk or operate vehicles.
But it sounds like from the statute that we can charge them for any damage they cause anyway. As I read the statute, I mean, you can pull something out, you can remove it, you can do whatever you want to do, whatever harm is caused, the abutters have to pay for if that happens. It just seems to me, you know, one of the advantages of being in a relatively small town is that you can make decisions on a case-by-case basis. You can make accommodations for the citizens of the town, who are asked to pay fairly high taxes for a lot of things. We've been asked to pay fairly high taxes for new buildings, which have great benefit for the town, but also great benefit for the town employees. And so it seemed to me, in looking at this particular basketball hoop, that I didn't see any need to remove it. I mean, maybe it's a safety concern if you get a particularly unskilled plow driver, and it would be a problem. But it just seems like we don't really need to butt in this particular situation. I mean, there's a 3-story behind this hoop, which I'd never seen. There's a 3-story water slide.
Get going on that one.
We don't have enough time to talk about that.
Backing up against Rockwood. I mean, you almost couldn't see the hoop because of the 3-story water slide that's behind it. So my view is we should leave well enough alone, and if anything comes of it, we can charge the
This is a
abutters.
completely themed park.
But
It is
now
a
what
truly
happens?
magnificent structure.
Mo
The
is
slide,
not here
yeah.
tonight.
I talked to Mo,
We
I
talked to him
emailed
at the
Mo.
conference,
Mo set out his views. I thanked him for his views. I think
Where
Mo
were they?
is taking precisely the position we want Mo to take in this circumstance. By statute, this is left with the elected representatives of the people of Medfield, and in my capacity, I was one of those elected representatives. I think the basketball hoop should stay and we should not remove it. I think the only precedent we're setting is that this particular basketball hoop in this particular cul-de-sac in Rockwood Lane is not a problem and it can stay. If I expected when I got there to see this thing in the middle of the cul-de-sac with, all laid out in front of me. It's way at the back between two driveways. So I don't think we need to do anything, would be my particular, and they should have responded to the DPW. But other than the rudeness of not responding to their letters, I think I have no problem with the basketball hoop.
So I would suggest the next step then is
Well,
that we
I
go
will-
out and look.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably right. We continue it, but I'll make a statement without having seen it. I have a harder-nosed view on that. It's not just not responding to Mo's message, but that's a piece of it. It's not asking for permission before you do it. I would be more inclined to be permissive about what people want to do in a cul-de-sac in the right-of-way if it's not a problem, so it wouldn't automatically be a no, as you were saying, well, gee, if they'd asked, they would have been told no, and then they would have been in a bind.
But never would have come to us. If they had called the DPW to ask, someone in the DPW would have said no, and that would have, never would have come to us.
The basic idea that any citizen can unilaterally do something to town property, I understand, this is inconsequential, but the next thing won't be as inconsequential. So I actually am I would like to take time to look at it, and I wouldn't even mind having them come if they want to come and talk to the Board of Selectmen to explain what their actions are and what their views are and what they would like us to do and why we should grant it if they want us to do something. And that's not so much because I just want to be a jerk with them, it's because I think it's a bad precedent to just kind of say, well, do it.
Precedent
and
issue.
we just kind of let it go. So I want to look at it first, because maybe this is so totally inconsequential that I'm being
Well, then
harder nosed.
I will draft a policy for our next meeting, presumptively permitting basketball hoops in every cul-de-sac in Medfield. If we have to have a policy on this, because we're afraid it's gonna be some precedent, Mark, if there's case law to this effect, if towns have been sued and courts have said, well, you allowed a basketball hoop in this cul-de-sac, so you have to allow it in this one, and whatever law you have on the precedent we'd be setting and how we'd be binding the
so
town.
let me finish
and
my
damages
point.
the town, I'd be happy to have that information.
So let me finish my position. Now, that's my position about just passively accepting it and going, wow, shouldn't do that. Go ahead with it. I'm not necessarily saying that we should tell them they have to take it down, but I am on board with what you're saying, Mark. If you want to keep it up, you did it on your own authority, you basically didn't respond when the town reached out to talk to you about it, you better doggone well give us something in writing that you're accepting all the liability. If there's no liability and it's not an issue, just sign and assume all the liability because it's inconsequential, so you're not giving anything away, and there will be no doubt if a plow hits that, or if somebody careens down and hits ice on the way down that cul-de-sac and plows into that and gets hurt, there will be no doubt it's on you, not on us.
You know, ironically, I've dealt with this stuff a lot, and invariably, the finger's pointed on the town plows, but a lot of times what it is private contractors plowing. So in a case like this, somebody in the middle of the night, or they've been working too long, whatever, forgets it's there, backs up, knocks it over, it causes damage, it causes injury, whatever. Those are the kinds of scenarios that you need to be concerned about.
Or
which is-
damages the plow truck, actually. Mark, can you, so Gus and I will go and look. Can you draft up the language that you would suggest that we have the neighbors sign? Because I think that's an important issue too, just like Gus does.
Yeah, for instance, it's a simple license agreement, basically,
Yeah,
not,
just whatever you think
Right.
it should be, and circulate that if you could, please.
And Mike, if you want to draft, I'm not against basketball courts or basketball hoops either, so if there's a productive
don't forget street
policy,
hockey.
whatever you want it to encompass. And it might, in fact, call out a requirement for that license to be signed. So there, right, whatever you want, but I'm more than happy to entertain a policy. It's just that, it's a slippery, I kind of side with the idea it's a slippery slope.
And we want Park and Rec to be able to control the scheduling of the court.
We'll make it such a pain, that no one will want to put it up.
So the next item is Director of Public Works Maurice Goulet requests the selectmen vote to sign Chapter 90 Final Report resurfacing Green Street, $176,794.72. So do we have a motion on that?
This is that's already been done, Mike, right? These are the projects that, like a year ago.
Yeah.
Right, so I would move that we,
Can you include North Meadows in
oh
it too?
yes, vote to sign the Chapter 90 final reports for resurfacing Green Street in the amount of $176,794.72 and resurfacing North Meadows Road, the amount of $973,773.15.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Contract with Environmental Partners Group for landfill monitoring, $30,600.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Yep. Contract with Eastern Minerals for joint purchase of road salt, 2017-18 bid amount awarded.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Discuss town administrator merit. So Chris circulated some numbers to us. I guess my initial reaction is that we should probably do some sort of evaluation or something of the town administrator as part of this, or do we just want to hand him money? What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
So, having been elected in March, I'm not in the best of positions to evaluate Mike on his overall year, so I found myself, and I had asked Chris, were there any goals or anything that's specific that I would have a basis for evaluating, and I haven't seen.
There haven't been for a couple of years.
Okay.
And so that, I mean, we could go back to the last iteration of the goals and work back from there.
So I'm happy to provide my subjective evaluation of Mike if that would be helpful, but I think you two, I will take the lead that you two have, because you were here for the full year.
What's your thought, Mike? Should we just pick a number, or do you want to do a little bit more formal evaluation?
Mark, I don't think there's anything in the town charter about this,
no,
about the process.
not at all.
Or any findings we need to make, or anything else.
Nothing, nada.
So it's just discretionary to the selectmen. I mean, I know, and we were very late last year doing, didn't we do it?
So late,
Yeah, we
almost
did
to
it like
the
in
end of the
July
year.
or something.
Yeah.
And there was no process really to it at that point
Yeah,
either.
so what I would recommend is
Is that a retroactive increase, Mike, or was
It is retroactive to
Okay.
July 1st.
This is actually the year from 1983 that we're working on right now.
I'm just catching up on paperwork.
We can stall for another 6 months if you'd like.
We did last year. I think, I know you're working on town goals. We need to finalize town administrator goals so that you can use these for evaluation purposes next July, so that we do merit evaluations when there should be done in that time period. Once you have those goals established, I can put them on a formal evaluation form for each of you to fill out. So I think that's the process going forward
For next year.
for next year.
So I guess for this one, I would suggest that we go back to the 2015 goals and just have a discussion of those as to how those have been satisfied.
Okay.
So maybe next meeting.
So, Mike, again, I'm the rookie here, but is that from a pure administrative standpoint, going back to a set of goals that were not the established goals is not necessarily the right way to do it. But if you say that that would be an appropriate way for us to consider your performance.
Whatever your pleasure, I don't have a problem either way.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there's also a practicality here as well, right? I mean, I think, I don't know that we need to retrofit a process to this. I mean, I think we should have a process going forward, you know, kind of as we get the policies and procedures. So I'm happy to put this off to the next meeting and talk about the older town goals and how we did against them. But I think we should come up with a process in advance for the next one. But, I don't know, anything you wanna cover, Pete? I mean, you've obviously done these a lot
I mean,
more
I-
of these than I have. I've only done one of them, and that was for a time when I wasn't even on the board, so.
Right, and there wasn't much process, it wasn't a very effective process. I mean, I think that the selectmen, it's one of the few things that we really should be doing is evaluating the town administrator's performance, and we should probably be doing it in a much more formal way than we do it. We've always just sort of done it on a very ad hoc basis, and I, personally, I don't think that's fulfilling our responsibility to the residents in the town.
But we have
I
to
think
do,
that we
but we
have
have
to-
to do something for this past year.
And that we should have something in terms of goals and measure the performance against the goals. And that's part of the problem of not having had goals in the past year, so. Which is part of the problem of why things should be on an annual calendar and should make sure that they get done every year. And so that's been part of the battle of making sure that things do get accomplished every year. So why don't we just try to work off of the 2015 goals then? We can recirculate those and. Pending items then, Selectman Murphy to discuss draft letter in support of cultural uses at Medfield State Hospital site.
Yeah, so actually, the draft you did, I think, was fine. When we reviewed that, I think all three of us approved the letter for Jean, pending the Master Planning Committee approving their letter from Steve, which Pete, you basically based the selectmen's letter off of Steve's letter, so they, except for the fact it's a slightly different perspective, the two letters are largely similar. I thought Steve did a nice job of writing the letter. So the only issue at this point, I think the way you had written the draft, you had put your signature block, which I would be totally fine with, just having the chairman of the board of selectmen sign it, but if you'd prefer the format where all three of us sign it, I think the draft that you sent to Jean is fine. It's just a question of what we do to produce that draft, to give it to Jean, if not tonight, maybe tomorrow night, or, you know, sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
So-
I just didn't have town letterhead. I would have put it on town letterhead, but I didn't have any, so.
Okay.
But it was in the email, the whole body of it, so you can just print it out.
So, okay, you'll take care of putting it on the letterhead. I think it stands right now, it's just you have to sign it, Pete, and that's probably enough unless it's like the Declaration of Independence and we're all gonna hang together on this thing.
Can you authorize Mike to sign?
Do you care?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'll sign it then. Selectman Murray to discuss updated status of town goals. Thank you for working on this.
Yeah, we're doing some good stuff. Well, I'll get to that later, but, so what you have here is a draft. At our last meeting, it seemed, the last meeting, the version of the goals, I used, track changes in Word to make some modifications, and I think the modifications that I made were all in the right-hand column, which was kind of the long-term goals, and nobody commented one way or the other. So for this one, I accepted all those changes in the absence of any concerns. I just built them in, and what I was really trying to do is to format this so that it would be in a way that we'd be ready to send it out. So I added this introductory thing with the thought that this entire document would go out, town website, Pete, maybe your blog, you could distribute it, and that would make it into the Facebook groups, and however else we would want to send this out to the townspeople with an invitation to respond. The only thing I didn't put in this was any instructions on exactly how to respond, so we're asking people to look at it. What I did, I mean, it would be good if you all would look at the details So we may still want to wait one more meeting before we go final on this. I added a few, what I was really trying to do is to put long-term goals in each one of the blocks. And so I added some. I didn't do anything to the key focus areas. I didn't do anything to the goal descriptions other than call out goal number 1, goal number 2, just to make it easy for people to understand. So it's really the long-term 5 to 10 year time frame goals that are probably worth looking at to see if you're okay with them, and if you think they're sufficient to live with. Is hard. It's still a draft, but the thing that we'd want to send out to people. And that is it. I didn't try to. I did add some things in there on those first 3 areas. I did not do anything to goals 4 and 5, which were the qualitative goals. I could have made stuff up, but I didn't really have anything that immediately bubbled up for me as a pressing priority. So that may be the area that some people who are advocates for certain things in town might have feedback for us on. So, so at whatever point you're comfortable with this, we can finalize it. The only issue, I think, is whether we should put in the instructions how we want people to give us feedback.
I just had one question on goal 2. You've got, consider it as a first option, the use of funds obtained through major capital sales of town assets as additional contributions to the town's OPEB obligation. I think if you send that out to the public, there might be a little concern. Are we gonna sell open space, or are we gonna sell, you know?
Well,
what are you
Mike,
talking about?
Yeah,
major
Mike,
capital assets?
that was your original draft. I left it alone, but actually, the thought that I had on that one was, by doing that, I'm actually getting more sensitive to the facilities stuff and some of the other major expenditures we have. By putting that in the goal, the OPEB chairman in me thinks that's a great idea. The selectman in me says, I'm tying my hands, given that we know there's some other big requirements coming in. So I like the sentiment. I like the direction until I started thinking about things like the facilities and some of those other, and I started to wonder whether we should, whether we should broaden that to something about, any sales should go toward long-term financial obligations.
And I think that was more the theme of my
Right,
thing.
right.
I think what I've always suggested was, for example, if we were to sell land,
Right.
putting money aside to pay for the design phase of the new Dale Street School, right?
Right.
So we know we have these expenses coming down the road, whatever they are.
Right.
Any sort of capital, but my principle is that sort of capital sales should not fund operating expenses.
Right.
And they
Right.
should not, in the first instance, go towards new stuff.
Right.
Right, where we have
Right.
existing obligations, if we sell capital assets that have been bought
Right.
over the years, essentially with the tax dollars of residents of Medfield,
Mhm.
if those are sold, the first place you go is in areas where we have a deficit.
Yeah.
And so obviously OPEB is the biggest deficit we have. The second biggest deficit we have, obviously, is building maintenance.
Yeah.
And so I'm comfortable with any sort of, but the idea is that the sale of a capital asset is not money to be spent
Right.
on new stuff in the first instance, is to be spent in the first instance on existing obligations.
Right.
that we have.
So I kind of agree with your point, Mike. That's one that we
We're
probably.
restricted by statute on it anyway, so to some degree it's a hypothetical argument.
Okay. It might be good for the townspeople to know that it's there, though, and so we
So
probably.
what is the restriction?
Land, if you're talking about selling capital, the first thing you do is have to pay off any debt on it, but secondarily, it has to go to a project that's bondable for the same length of time that was. So it's a capital, you can only put it into capital, you can't put it into operating anymore.
Okay. But you could put it into OPEB could be bonded.
Yeah, I think you and I had that discussion and didn't come to any final conclusion along. That it's at least, it's a possibility.
I know Wellesley did it, so I mean, in theory, it can be done.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
they absolutely bonded that debt, I just don't know.
Yeah.
The land's a 20-year, so it's 20 years and you can do it.
But I mean, a school building would be 20 years. too.
Right,
So it
absolutely.
could go into that.
Yeah.
It could go into-
Yeah.
Some of these maintenance projects conceivably can be built, bonded for 20 years, so you could go into that.
Right.
Well, when we did the public safety building, we looked into using money that was left over from the town garage for the design. And you can't use it for design because design, you're limited to 5 years.
I see.
the town garage was 20 years, so we had to wait and use it for the construction, so.
Maybe what I'd suggest this time around is that all three of us make some changes. So I'll try to incorporate that change. I know there's one place I left a little number sign out, but maybe if all three of us could send whatever edits, if any, into Christine or Evelyn.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of the right way to process this from an open meeting law standpoint. You can't send them to me probably, although you can if you want, and then I'll bring them to the meeting, but I'm thinking we'll wind up with 3 revisions coming into you guys. I don't think they're radical revisions, they're kind of, and then either we all see all 3 of them at the next meeting, at which time I could then compile them, or if it's not too bad, you guys are in a position to compile them, that's fine. We'll look at that with a goal of being able to go final. Thoughts on the issue around the instructions as far as how we would want, maybe this is a question for you, Christine.
We can set up an email so people have people.
Set up an email, so I'll leave that, I'll annotate that, but that
Town
can be
goals at
whatever.
Medfield.net.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay.
Just make sure you get the extra sized inbox for all of the comments that we're going to get.
Okay.
Anything
So we're probably one meeting away from, well, at best, we're one meeting away from finalizing this.
If you send it out the next meeting, it'll be great, because people will say they need a new website, and within 2 weeks we'll have the new website, and you'll look very responsive.
Are we that close on the
There's
website?
pressure.
Right. The one thing I would say on number 2, Gus, I mean, maybe we could, sort of on the key focus areas, sort of expand it into proactively planning for the maintenance and upgrade of town buildings and all capital assets.
Where are you here?
The first bullet point.
Oh, your town buildings and all capital assets, yep.
We
Okay.
cover all of that.
Yep.
And I've got a couple language
Okay.
changes that I'll send along.
Okay.
We all set on that then?
I think we are.
Annual appointments.
You don't have
Is there a copy in there? I don't think I saw that.
I don't think so, no.
No, I emailed you each a copy of it.
You can share mine with me.
About 3 weeks ago?
That one I had, but I thought you were updating.
There was only one change, and that was the zoning board, so I didn't resend it to you.
All right.
Yeah,
I'll
I don't
look at
have
it.
it.
That's fine.
So put it off.
Defer it till the 7th.
Defer it. I mean, don't do it just because I don't have my copy.
I don't have my copy either.
Okay.
Okay, we'll put it off then.
Why don't you send us all
I'm
another
gonna send
copy?
you all a new copy.
I'll take this 5 minutes on this meeting.
And the veteran service officer, we're pretty much discussed out. Is there anything further on that?
No, I'll start interviewing the candidates that have submitted
Okay.
resumes for specifically just the DSL. But
I do have a question. Is that going to be for a part-time position or a full-time position?
Part-time.
part-time.
I think the trade-off we have is either we take longer to try to figure out a way to bundle it with another half-time. We just took a run at it, wasted we spent 3 meetings trying to get to a solution that probably was the closest to true synergy we might have gotten. And,
No, and I understand. And,
Yeah.
you know, as the outreach worker has been away for
Yeah.
8 weeks now, you know, that's, I see, very critical to what's going on down at the senior center. And, you know, now we're 12 weeks without a veteran service officer in town. And
Yeah.
sooner or later, that is gotta
Yeah.
rear an ugly head somewhere.
So what we're doing is, if we have to go this route, we're getting the veteran service officer that's required to provide the service, given the scope of what it takes to do it. And if we get a person who suddenly blossoms into someone with great interest and it matches up with a need down the road, then we could always expand it to be full-time. But this is hanging us up. We're trying to get through 2 needles, and the 2 needles aren't lined up.
It is hanging everything up, right?
And the people who have applied want a part-time job.
Yeah.
And we've tried so many things. We tried merging with another town. We tried joining, forming a district. Nothing, we talked to the assessors, we talked to the Council on Aging about combining positions and haven't gotten anywhere on it. It's been tough.
The good news is I think at least some of those candidates are coming in with VSO experience. So this is not, let's get a veteran and have them spend 6 months learning how to do the job. I think we can expect them to be qualified coming out the gate.
We've got the licenses and permits consent
I
agenda.
Move that we approve the licenses and permits on the consent agenda as set forth in the agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Yep. Town administrator update.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, tomorrow morning at 9:30, we are meeting with the Millis DPW director and town administrator, as well as Representative Linsky, Representative Dooley's chief of staff, and Representative Garlick's chief of staff, to discuss the bridge repairs at the West Street of 109. And we're hoping that we will try to figure out some way to work out a better cost-sharing arrangement, since these are really commuter roads and not local roads. So that'll be 9:30 here. If any of you are available and want to come by, you're more than welcome.
Anything else, Mike?
Nope.
I just have one thing. The Affordable Housing Trust Committee and the Affordable Housing Committee are going to do a site visit. If either of you are available, tomorrow at 4:30, we're gonna go look at the 9395 North Street property. Not everybody on those committees can make it tomorrow, so we've still posted it for those that can. But there's several people who will be scheduling a second walkthrough before your next.
Is that the McCready property?
Correct.
Okay.
But we'll have a second walkthrough at a later date. Yeah, I have a lot of people that can't make it tomorrow.
Now, that's a
4:30, Chris?
that's a project that could go either way. It could be done as a LIP with the support of the Board of Selectmen, or it could go through the regular Board of Appeals process.
Oh, is it an unfriendly 40B?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
at this point, he's just proposing to do it as the
Yeah.
LIP.
Yeah.
At least through May, he can't do it as an unfriendly.
Yeah.
So my reaction after hearing his presentation, and I know that you worked with him, Mike, I assume you sort of guided him in terms of numbers, probably.
He didn't take my advice, I guess, to put it one way to put
all
it.
right.
But,
'Cause his numbers seem high to me.
I did have some design recommendations that he did follow, so.
Yeah, I
but,
mean, I was gonna suggest to him that he do an 8-unit project, and that
I suggested
that would be
that,
something that would be more palatable to me than 14.
I suggested that he reduce the number of units somewhat, but said it would not work.
Does it give you your next safe harbor and add to the other West Street projects, or will you be short?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Will you meet your safe harbor if he drops his number of units?
Well, there are other things in the pipeline that could make up for that, so.
I mean, you could do a group home for the other 5 that you'd
Well,
need.
you'll
and
need
so-
to, because
Yeah.
you won't have enough if
Right.
he drops the number.
I mean, there's money for a group home, and you just need to, and there's an entity that wants to
But
run
you
it.
gotta get hot, I think.
And so that you need you need a site in the downtown to,
If you're talking into it, you gotta get moving on the inside.
yep.
The question is it fair to a neighborhood to what he's proposing? Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I mean, this
No, I
should-
thought it was very instructive listening to the neighbors, that they convinced me that 14's kind of
The
excessive.
numbers he had were the numbers you needed with the other North Street projects.
We also, based on the discussion we had about Tilden Village the last time, we're fairly optimistic they can get to a comprehensive permit by April for their expansion.
I'm sorry, that they can?
They can.
The feedback that I
Oh,
got
good.
from-
What's that?
That wasn't the feedback or the impression I got from somebody who was at the meeting, I wasn't able to attend. They thought that perhaps it looked a little.
I'm just going from what the guy said, the Newgate guy said. He thought-
I don't think you want to go much further into this discussion. It's not on the agenda.
Anything else on town administrator update then?
No.
Correction of the minutes then from September 19. I just had one, which was that there was, Evelyn wrote, final submission. This had to do with the timing for the bylaw, the articles for the town meeting. And she had December 1, something submitted, or article submitted by September 1, December 1. January 2 is the date for anyone who has changed their mind about an article. Final submission by January 15 to allow town council complete a legal review. So that last part made it sound to me like anybody could submit up to January 15, which isn't the case. They have to submit by December 1, so I suggested that she clarify that.
What, the clarification for the January 15th is final modifications, final edits, revisions? What is the final?
I don't know what the January 15 was, but it's not the, you don't have until January 15 to
That's
submit
for
it.
the final language. So in other words, you can submit by December 1st to get it on the warrant. They have the time to modify, but the final language has got to be done by the 15th.
So articles have to be submitted by December 1st. January 2nd is the date for any revisions to an article? I didn't understand the words.
Yeah, I think there's only 2 dates.
That's what I thought.
I think it's just December 1st and January 2nd. I don't
That's
think
what I
there's a
thought.
January 15th date.
I thought actually the legal review was supposed to be done by
But
January 15th.
technically, I think, how long did you say you have to leave the warrant open for as a requirement? Didn't you say that in no
No,
time?
there's nothing. That's all local practice.
I mean, that's the way I read this. What Evelyn wrote was that the legal review should be done by January 15, but not that residents can do anything at that
Right.
point.
But, so,
Frankly, if residents submit, if there's a petition comes in, we pretty much, our hands are tied unless they basically agree to a modification of language. Otherwise, you have to take it as they've submitted it.
Well, that's why we tell them not to sign a petition until they have reviewed the wording with town council and make
That
sure it's in
hasn't stopped
proper
them in the
form.
past.
Well, I'm
Okay.
working on the form that'll go out with the budget packets, for department heads that will be submitting, any department heads or committees that'll be submitting warrant articles. And then also a form for the town clerk to give people for when they do a warrant article. Right now, there's no guidance whatsoever when somebody wants to do one by petition.
They're free to contact me, and I'll be happy to help them.
I know, but
along.
it's easier to give them a form to
Oh, yeah.
show them what to
Right.
fill out.
I'm
So at
just
least have a
saying.
starting point.
so for the meeting minutes though, my recollection of our discussion was that we said anyone who's submitting an article, and we made provisions for an emergency article, the selectmen could open it up, put something in, but any routine articles to be submitted have to be submitted by the 1st of December, so we know what the articles are. Those articles, I believe we said, could be revised up to the 2nd of January. That was it. And then I think that beyond that, it was the legal review, and I can't remember, seems a little tight to say you only have 2 weeks to do the legal review of all
It
the
doesn't
articles.
take,
It doesn't take that long. So in that case, I think what we said is the legal reviews of the article. In other words, if you do a legal review and something that's written in a revised article that's been submitted calls for a further revision, you're gonna identify that by the 15th of January, and that gives us enough time to actually finalize those articles in time to have them printed in
We
the
just
warrant.
need clear, bright line
Yeah.
language.
I mean, the overwhelming amount of them, other than when we've got the rezone, stuff like that,
Yeah.
is Mike and myself. Some department or whatever may have told one of us that that's what they want an article for such and such, but ultimately, it's this team over here that works it out.
So Chris, can you just make the language clear?
Sure.
I'll give you this.
So it would be that the article, I would say advise that routine warrant articles should be submitted by December 1st. Revisions
by
to those
January
articles
2.
must be submitted by January 2nd.
Final revisions.
Revisions, because then the final town council to complete a legal review by January 15th. The only reason I'm
Yeah,
blocking it.
I hear what you're saying, that's fine. It doesn't add anything anyway.
What happened last year, in years past, the warrant committee has complained they didn't have enough time to review the budgets. Last year, they got all their budgets reviewed very quickly, the budgets came in on time,
Yeah,
but
hopefully
the
this will
warrant
cure
articles were
this.
late. And they didn't have time to review the warrant articles, so it was, hopefully this year we'll get them both in.
So with that
to them
revision,
in
is there
time.
a motion to accept the minutes then?
Yes, I move that we accept the minutes.
Second.
That revision.
All those in favor? Yep.
Aye.
Selectmen's reports, Mr. Marcucci.
Sure. Couple of updates. I asked Mark, I asked Mark a question about LIP applications and the kinds of terms we might have in an agreement with the developer that we do a LIP with. And so he's started to put together, and we get some, Jay Talman weighed in on some of his experience, he's starting to put together a sort of a draft form agreement. We have the McCready thing going. I expect that we will have a request from John Kelly for a LIP project on Dale Street. He's due to meet with the MRA group next week, and so
What is the MROD?
the MRA group is what used to be the Stop Medfield Meadows, Dale Street
Oh,
Neighbors Group.
Medfield
the Medfield
Responsible
Responsible.
Affordable Housing.
So he's gonna meet with a small contingent of that group next week to discuss his newly kind of revised proposal for that property. And so he's gonna get some feedback from that group, and then we're gonna proceed from there. I don't think he'll be in front of the Affordable Housing Trust in November, but maybe December, based on that feedback. But I thought, given with that coming along and with McCready, there were some terms we probably want to have in this kind of agreement, and so I've asked Mark to put together something. We can put it on an agenda for a future discussion, but just to let you know that that's been in the works. Then the update on the Kelly meeting with MROD next week. I had something else as well to raise, but now I've forgotten what it is. Something else to do with, the holiday stroll. So starting last summer, or last spring, or last winter, I'd been having a back and forth with Chief Meany about the possibility of closing Main Street for the holiday stroll. And we've had some further discussions. He wanted to see how the closing of the street on the library went. Sounds like he's favorably disposed. It's something we can do, and he's gonna be in touch with folks from Memo about doing it. I had offered to him that we're likely to have some money available in our downtown improvement fund to the extent there's a budget issue around overtime for the officers to direct the people around. But I've thought this every year I've been to the tree lighting, and last year especially with the holiday stroll set up, tends to be pretty trafficky, lots of kids running around, dark. Kind of a safety concern generally in the whole corner and area, and that it might be a nicer event overall if that section were closed and people.
That's
could
a very
cross
good idea.
The street and the rest of it. So I think the chief thinks it's doable. He's gonna try to work out with, and Gene has left, but talk to Gene and the other folks to figure out where things are and where best to route the traffic. But just to give you a heads up that we've been having that discussion. I didn't say there's a number or anything in that fund, but just in case he comes and says, yeah, I need some money for overtime, I thought that would be something we could consider in the future. It's a great event. I think it's a good highlight. I think this year they're adding food trucks and the pizza food truck and some other things to the whole event. And so I had suggested maybe closing it from 6 to 9 or something like that around the tree lighting when it gets fairly congested on the sidewalk and the rest of it. So I think that was the other thing I wanted to raise. I made notes of this and left my notebook in my car. So if there's anything else to raise in my selectmen's report, I've forgotten it, so.
Okay, Gus?
Just the ALS study committee is still making progress. I'm actually optimistic still that we'll get to an option which won't be a zero-cost option, but it'll be a lot less than what we were initially wrestling with. We had the medical officer come in our last meeting. The one interesting thing that I learned at that meeting is that we're the one region in Massachusetts where the medical officer requires 2 paramedics on a shift, so
We're the
we
only ones,
basically,
wow.
I understood the explanation. Basically, sometimes you have an incident where it's complex enough, you need 2 paramedics. So it's interesting because it's a minority position nationally. It's a minority position in Massachusetts, but it is the position we're dealing with. And to be honest, I didn't completely disagree with his rationale. So that's going in a good direction. I think we'll have a good recommendation. Pete, you may talk about the Selectmen's Conference, but both Pete and I were at the conference, and you may have some points to make. The only one I'll make is the breakout that I went to that Pete did not go to was the open meeting / public records law. And so I was interested in the open meeting, given our casual conversation about that. From my perspective, what I heard about the open meeting law changes did not really disturb me that much, because it had more to do with enforcement actions and I don't see us necessarily fighting major battles on that front. And what it did is it made it easier for somebody like me, if I'm on a business trip, to actually call in without having to go through all the hoops to get it authorized. So there may be times when one or the other of us is not here, that as long as two of us are here, we could still
We
have,
have
we could
to
have some.
adopt that. I don't believe the selectmen.
We haven't adopted it. We should, I think we should adopt it myself, but.
That might help a little bit. But anyway, that piece had been relaxed, and I was happy to hear that. To be honest with you, I don't think our biggest problem is gonna be the open meeting law. I think our biggest problem is gonna be the public records law. With the kind of teeth that it has in it, we've already seen requests coming in from, what was it, Ohio?
Oh, they screen
Florida,
commercial stuff. in
Right,
multiple countries.
right. And from what they were saying at the briefing, and then there are also some activists that just literally plug in public records requests because they're testing town systems to see if they can be responsive, which
And then
is,
there's also
We've had two of
the
those.
retaliation type situations, which historically we have had, we haven't had anything
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
but somebody doesn't know what they want, and then they just come back at you with all.
but we won't get that because we've got such nice people on the board of selectmen. that-
I went to
And
it,
a really good
yes,
records
yes,
access officer who has no problem putting it together.
I went to a town administrators meeting a few weeks ago, and one town had gotten 251 public records requests. Another town had expended $70,000 in legal services responding to them, so.
Like I said, that one
And-
felt to me like the more potentially damaging law, depending on how it gets played
Yeah.
out.
Some of the towns have had to hire a full-time person to respond to requests.
And then the last point, and again, I'll defer to you for details, because all three of us were there, and Mike didn't mention it, but the state hospital tour that we had of the buildings that had been used was impressive, what they were able to do. And then when the trailer came out for the movie, it was really fun to look at it, because I'd been there just a few days earlier, so it was really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie, just to
And
see the linoleum.
recognize several of the rooms
Right.
from the
Yeah,
trailer.
Right,
yeah, yeah.
right. So, that's it.
The hospital room I recognized. So I think to me, the MMA select, I guess what do they call it, fall selectmen's meeting, I thought was just very nicely done. You got this update from Jeff Beckwith, who's the executive director, on the state legislation, the federal legislation issues. And then it was fun to hear the main presentation was on leadership and how to be a better leader. And the presenter and Gus, since Gus is in the leadership business, had this wonderful colloquy about how to do it. So, but it was a good learning experience, and so.
The first breakout on town goals, felt like we were really prepared for that.
Yes. Anything in the informational then?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to just bring your attention, my letter to the Noon Hill resident and the resident's response. Concom's taking this up Thursday night. I don't really want to go into much detail right now, but it remains to be seen how this is going to play out.
Okay. The residents' response didn't get circulated to us. It is here, but.
Right. This has been going on for some months now. Again, it's been a lack of response, and it's, from the Concom's position, it's somebody doing things without getting prior approval through the proper channels, and something has to be done about it now, and now we're having difficulty getting the residents to address this, so.
They missed the first hearing entirely, didn't they? There was-
Two.
didn't res-
Two
hearings.
as of now.
They just did not
He
come.
did file, they did file a written responses, but it's just not, they're disregarding a very established process and putting the Conservation Commission in a difficult position in terms of something that typically they would try to work out with a resident. They're not looking to, be punitive. They try to resolve things with people, but when people are not willing to meet with them at all to do that, it's difficult. It limits your options.
Anything else in the informational, guys?
I sure appreciate getting that letter from Peter Godwin, complimenting John Knapp on the job he did.
Yeah, that was nice to see.
I also had a resident come in, last week to compliment the Public Works Department for the work they were doing on South Street, cleaning up the brush and regrading the slopes, and he thought it was very helpful. And
So do we have we're adjourning then?
Motion to adjourn.
Excellent.